We'll like to call this meeting to order at 7 o'clock. I'd like to inform all board member attendees that this meeting is being live streamed and archived for access at any time by our community members on the internet within 24 to 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mrs. Barber.
Here.
Mrs. Jung. Here. Mr. Carey. Here. Mr. Lawler.
Here.
Mr. Rivas.
Here.
Mrs. Witt. Here. And Mrs. Pavlak is absent.
Okay, with 6 members present, we have a quorum. Would anyone like to move something from consent to new business?
There is one item, I can't see it. The new employee one. I3, is it?
I3, would you like that to go to closed session?
Yes, please.
Anything else? All right. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended? And a second, and I'll roll call.
Mrs. Jung. Mr. Carey. Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Motion carries 6-0. We'll move on to board and superintendent salutes.
I'm just going to briefly tell Mr. Adkins, he's not feeling well, so he went home. But Mr. Adkins and Mrs. Ross, thank you for their work setting up the new teacher meet and greet. And obviously, they've gone to take their pictures and have taken off. So just wanted to also recognize any of them that were still here. So any of the new staff members want to watch a board meeting. Jimmy, thanks for coming back, Jimmy, for however long you decide to stay. Thank you. And so that was all we had for tonight.
All right.
Yeah.
We will move on to public comments. Are there any public comments tonight? Nope. We'll move on to the consent agenda then. The consent agenda contains the following action items: approval of accounts payable and payroll September 2019, approval of minutes of the September 9th, 2019 regular meeting, approval of 2018-19 administration and teacher salary and benefits report, approval of III conference attendance expenses, approval of renewal of flexible spending provider, student suspension, and the following informational items: the student suspension data report, the Freedom of Information Act report, the field trip notification. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended? So moved. And a second? And a roll call.
Mr. Carey. Aye. Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mrs. Jung.
Motion carries 6-0. We'll move on to J1, discussion and approval of solar energy.
Yep. If you recall, over the last, since July, we've had Mr. Raftery here a number of times to lay out information for us, allow the board opportunities to ask and have questions answered. And so I think we're at a point where, as part of our presentation tonight, or part of the discussion, we do have the recommendation in the memo for batch 1 to be approved. But then also, if you look on the back page of the memo, the Kaneland High School piece, we do have a little more information that we're going to share tonight. And with the information that we've included, if the board is in favor of moving forward with the information after hearing about the high school tonight, we can take action tonight, because we do have it down there as discussion and approval of solar energy, not specific to batch 1. So with that, after we have some of those questions asked and answered, we can see if there's anything else we need before taking action. And so I don't know if Julianne, if you're going to give it back to Aaron or Mark, or just see what questions that the board has.
I think the only thing I would want to mention to the board, that in your memo, I've given you the specifics of the estimates for the proposed systems. It's for Harder Middle School, John Stewart Elementary School, and John Shields Elementary School. All 3 of those are roof mount systems. And you can see underneath of that table some bulleted points with regard to the terms of the power purchase agreement and estimated program savings. That says over 5 years, but that should say over 25 years. I apologize. Shoot. So the estimate in the last bullet point, it says estimated savings. That's over 25 years. Sorry about that. Just saw it right now. And then also, Dr. Layden and I met with the FPC, And they had great questions and a good conversation. Thank you to both Mr. Rafferty and Mr. Payton. They were there to answer them. And following that discussion, they were very much in support of the way the district is moving forward with the solar. So with that being said, I think I can ask the board if you have any questions. I do have a recommendation for batch one. You can either keep that recommendation or have a discussion on the high school and do it both at once, whatever works best for the board.
Do you guys want to talk about all of them at once as well? I ended up attending the FPC meeting, whatever that was, a couple weeks ago. One question that they had was if it was going to change the rates of your current provider. I presume
We did, we
talked about
followed up with that, and it will not change the rates. The only way it might affect our rates is if we did all of the schools. And at this point, I don't believe that our recommendation still today for Dr. Lane and I is for the board to move forward with Blackberry and McDowell because of it being a ground mount system in a subdivision. We've gotten some information that we shouldn't probably try to move forward. It may be a futile experience.
So you're feeling like even if you did half the high school and, or you
The three
excluded
that
half
we
the high
have.
school, whichever way you want to
yeah,
look at it.
The three that we have and half the high school.
Yeah.
We've been told that that won't change
Good.
it.
Perfect.
Yep.
And just to say that someone asked, because you're kind of you have a contract for your current energy supplier, would that change anything that you've negotiated in that contract, which was, I thought, a good question. Anything else?
Yes. So if we potentially add the high school into this as well, now is the max of savings at the very beginning, meaning at the end of this year? Because I know we pushed to try to get the leverage on the energy cost, or whatever it is, or the kickback that you get, if you will, for train. So by adding the high school, does that add more savings to it as opposed to if we did it later on? I'm trying to do the I'm trying to guesstimate the 1.6 million savings.
Yeah. So adding the high school, in terms of savings, would add another $1.5 million in program savings. As far as so there's the savings and then there's the incentive, right? It's kind of two separate topics. The time sensitive, there's two time sensitive items. One is the state incentives, which is currently down to 12 megawatts as of this morning. So potentially waiting on the high school or any part of the project, you could potentially risk losing that state incentive amount. I don't have any reason to think delaying a month would, but it's just we don't know. And then the other thing is there's the federal tax credit that we're capturing is scheduled to step down at the end of the year, and we can qualify for this year's tax incentive amount if we recognize 5% of our costs. And so that's something that we're kind of juggling on our end, but the closer we get to the end of the year, then we might have to potentially look at revising the energy rate for the high school if we're looking at next year's federal tax credit amount. Does that answer your question?
The 5% that you just mentioned, can you elaborate a little bit more on what
So,
you're saying?
yeah, so the federal tax credit is currently, so part of the benefits of doing a power purchase agreement for a public agency such as yourselves is that you don't qualify for this very large lucrative federal tax credit that's available and has been available for about a decade now. That is scheduled to phase out over the next, or ramp down over the next 3 years, where right now it covers 30% of the total project costs. That's all project costs, including soft costs, engineering, labor, all materials. So 30% of all the project costs we can capture as the federal tax credit. The tax credit amount steps down to 26% next year, and then it steps down to 22% the following year, and then down to 10% indefinitely, based on current legislation. So
Okay.
right now, we're assuming we can get that 30% amount and qualify for this year's rates.
Hence, we get the benefit from it as
Yeah,
well, right?
but that's what allows us to offer you the reduced energy rate.
Right,
when
but I
we-
mean, but adding the high school now will enhance that 1.6.
It'll bump that up to 3.1 million.
All right, that's what I want
To
to
do
do.
half
Yeah.
the project?
What's that?
If
just
we
the
just do
west
the
side.
west side?
Just the west
If you
side.
just did the west side, yep,
Thank you.
yep. I discarded the east side, so I don't have those numbers in my head anymore.
Okay.
And I believe that's what we were shooting for anyway, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So that was good to see there. That's good. That's good.
I might have a question for Mr. Payton while you're there. When I was looking information on J3, actually, but it made me look at the capital plan that was out there that I think we talked about in November, December, and it had eventually there to be a need to repair the high school, part of the high school roof. I assume that's not imminent? Is that, or that project
Well,
wouldn't impact
You know,
this?
there's parts of the high school
Yeah.
roof that we're watching
Yeah.
because it's aged out.
Right.
Not currently a problem, I mean, not a major problem, little leak here or there, we get it repaired.
Right.
But there are a couple of areas that are high on our watch list.
But I assume nothing that would make you think it would be a better idea to do something on the roof of the high school.
No, not, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Not, the areas I'm watching probably aren't large enough to
Conducive to it.
impact like the ground mount is
Yeah,
gonna impact.
I figured, I just thought, figured I would ask. Okay.
Couple more questions. Is the savings a guesstimation? And if so, how far off potentially will it be?
It is an estimation, but it's, solar, compared, so we do other types of energy savings programs, like energy efficiency. Solar is by far the easiest to predict, right? Because the weather, although, I mean, while the weather isn't very predictable kind of day to day or week to week, it's extremely predictable in a given geographical location on an annual basis. So we take into account irradiance, given these geographical locations. We build in assumptions regarding soiling, so like some dirt buildup on the panels, and what else? There's a few other factors that go into it, but solar is extremely predictable. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it generally be off a little bit potentially, but in the general area.
Right,
What you
yeah,
mentioned.
yeah.
All right, so 3.1, I believe you mentioned, it boosted up if you do the high school.
Correct.
So before the 1.6, in looking at some of the numbers, I think it was 60,000 that it was annually would save us, I think it was. Which was about 10% if you look across the board. So then the 3.1 across the board, it almost double that then, 20%?
That sounds right, yeah.
Okay.
I don't have the exact percentage.
Right, I'm
but
just
yeah,
gonna,
yeah.
could have taken the calculator to it, but
Yeah,
I'm good.
we can do that real quick.
Gotta do it real quick. No, that's cool. I think it's kind of almost doubled it. Yeah.
And there was a question at
124,000?
Okay.
Yeah.
Double. Okay, great.
There was a question at a previous board meeting regarding the environmental impact, which for batch one, not including the high school, it's CO2 equivalents of eliminating 970 metric tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which corresponds to it's like an equivalent to over 1 million pounds of coal burned in a given year. And it's equivalent to the sequestration of 1,170 some acres of trees, which is kind of a neat. We will potentially have to pull down a couple trees here at the high school, but
You think
in the
that'll
grand
offset?
scheme of things,
That does hurt me, but.
you're doing good. Yeah. Yeah. And then just double those numbers if we talk about adding the high school as well.
I'm guessing Julianne would be the one to answer this question. It says in the contract that we're supposed to maintain at-force insurance coverage or at-risk. How much is that going to cost us?
Nothing additional.
Yeah.
It's covered under our policy.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome. It's a great benefit being in the insurance pool with the other school districts, because we combine all of our risk and get the benefits of it. So it's really good.
One last question, that's from me. In a previous meeting, someone asked about how often you had to replace the panels and when they were replaced, whatever that time frame is. I know you're gonna be monitoring them and such.
Right.
I believe I heard that we have to take incur the cost to get them replaced. Is that correct?
No, so we take care of the system itself, right? If any defects to the system, any damage to the system, right, that's all on us throughout the contract period. I think the scenario that was brought up during a previous board meeting is if you needed to do roof work that was completely independent of it wasn't caused by our system, then there would be some additional costs associated with removing that component of the system in order to repair the roof, which that would not be part of our contract.
And then the other kind of associated one was if there were new technology that came about within
Yep.
the 25 years.
Yep.
I believe that was the one that I was trying to actually refer to, right?
Okay, yeah, and so if new technology, so at any given time within the 25-year period, we can renegotiate the power purchase agreement. So if new technology comes out that is so far advanced beyond today's technology that it makes cost-effective sense to upgrade to that system, then we would just renegotiate the power purchase agreement. I'm not necessarily expecting that. Like, I think I brought up an example. I wouldn't expect the solar panels or the inverters themselves to improve to that amount in the next 25 years, but there's these kind of solar plus opportunities, such as solar plus storage, that it may make sense to adopt additional technologies as part of the program. And if that happens, then we'll be right back here in front of you guys trying to agree on a new program or extra program.
All right, I lied. I got one more. How are these panels equivalent to the Tesla ones? Tesla's got a big problem with the solar panels.
Solar City, yeah. The problem, is that what we said?
No. How is that compared to the one that Tesla uses or whatever?
Well, it's tier one. So right now we have LG panels planned. I mean, we would always do, there's kind of three main panel manufacturers that we buy from, and they're always kind of leapfrogging each other. And so we haven't finalized exactly which panel we'd use, but right now we have the LG panel planned, which is best panel in the market as far as we're concerned. The Tesla one, I mean, the solar Tesla panels are great on the residential side. On the commercial side, I don't know, they've been having some troubles lately with fires on Walmart, and so it's,
Oh, hey,
yeah.
keep them away.
I don't mean to slam Tesla, but that,
I asked. Thank you.
yeah.
That's it.
Have we finalized what the fence around the panels at the high school will look like?
We haven't, but from our perspective, we don't feel that we need to finalize that at this point. They, well, within reason, yeah, I mean,
Within the option reasons.
within reason, yeah. It's a very, very small fraction of the overall cost. So again, unless we were talking about some major structure that you want us to build, we're not concerned with minor changes to the fencing. Like black chain link fencing is kind of the most common, right? Or sometimes, I don't know what the fencing's called, but like the kind of ribbed spiked fencing. I don't know, but it hasn't been an issue in the past.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there a very expensive fencing that you know you want?
I have no idea. I would leave that up to probably
Yeah.
the administration,
Right.
so.
Yeah.
It is one of the negatives to me is a chain link fence in the front of your school.
Yeah.
Is something that does, I think kind of stinks. So if there is a way that you guys see to make that better, I think that's
Okay.
a plus.
Less obtrusive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, less so the solar panels and more like envisioning a chain link fence is, probably more of a,
Yep.
yeah, you can do it, upgrade that, but,
And you get to see it all the time.
eh.
Well, and you discussed that there was also the possibility of putting, like native plants, right, in that area?
Yep, yep. We probably would have to put some native plants in the area associated with stormwater control. Most authorities having jurisdiction actually treat solar panels as impervious surfaces, like as if we were putting down asphalt, which is obviously not the case because the water runs off the panel onto the ground right below it. But so we actually we have to do native plantings anyways, but there's an opportunity to kind of go above and beyond as far as the native plantings and do like pollinator gardens and depending on your aesthetics, a lot of people like that better than just turf or yeah.
Maybe that'll help with the ugliness of the fence.
The visual piece.
Is there any chance you would need a lot of dirt and you could move our big mountain? We have to ask everybody.
Any project includes
Actually,
that.
they had to build a retention pond.
Yeah, we're not gonna need dirt, we're gonna be pulling dirt out.
Big mountain.
All right,
Just
anything,
put solar panels all up it.
Right on top of it.
anything else?
So are we addressing the high school in this?
We
or-
can.
Yes.
That's the wording added to the,
I do have wording if that's what people want me to do, or you can make up your own, but I have it written down.
I would suggest, do I need to make a motion that you add it to this recommendation, or do we just do it?
You want this?
So
you're the
Shauna-
speed
Well, Shauna, why don't you just make
Shauna,
that?
that
Is the
addresses
added.
the high school, this one addresses
Batch one.
the other batch one. So do you want one motion? Because if so, I need one more minute.
I can probably combine the two.
Okay, if you can combine them, that'd be
If
great.
that's what people want before I try to combine
Yeah.
the fly, right? All right. So I move that the Board of Education direct the administration to proceed with Train through a power purchase agreement for the purchase and installation of roof mount solar panels to be installed at Kaneland Harder Middle School, Kaneland John Shields Elementary School, and Kaneland John Stewart Elementary School, as well as
Yep.
proceed with Train through a power purchase agreement for the purchase and installation of ground mount solar panels to be installed at Kaneland High School at the west end of the property. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion or
Point of
someone done?
Clarification, should we say southwest? Or does it,
Or the west end that was outlined in the presentation.
yeah,
Presentation.
something a little bit, because
Yeah.
Meredith is
Yep.
West as well.
southwest.
We can definitely do southwest.
Southwest?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Unless you want to dispute that. No, you're good. The second.
All right, no more discussion, and a roll call, please.
Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas,
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
and Mrs. John.
Motion carries 6-0. Thank you for all your time here.
Thank you.
And elsewhere.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Payton is very excited right now. I just want y'all to
Yeah,
know.
and Mr. Payton too,
That's the
but,
super excited look.
yes, you've been here a
Aren't you?
lot. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
We'll be back for the ribbon cutting ceremony next year.
All right,
right.
we expect that. All right.
Climb the fence.
So J2, discussion of budget planning for 2020-21.
No,
That's you.
no, won't do it on the roof. Yes.
J2.
Keep us moving. I'll do my best here. The next one, this is an annual presentation before we get into budgeting for the 2021 school year. Dr. Fuchs generally will come in and share budget models, revenue assumptions, along with expenditure assumptions, get some feedback from the board, and then you'll see this come back again probably in November, correct? December.
Yep,
Yep, in December.
great, thank
go
you.
ahead, thank you.
And actually, maybe it'll get done a little earlier, because I think the audit's gonna be done. So if that happens, maybe November, you're right. So maybe you helped us move it up a little.
Awesome.
So,
the
the
audit
assumptions that we're gonna talk about tonight, again, our revenue and our expenditure assumptions. I use this information to get our base started for the budget planning for the following year. Anything we talk about tonight is only the initial conversation to get us started. Each of the items will come back at various times, at various appropriate times throughout the next couple months as we go through the budgeting cycle. So if anything changes, we can change it. The model is very flexible. We can do what-if scenarios. If you want to know, well, what happens if we put this in there? What happens if we put that in there? We have a lot of flexibility, but your discussion tonight will provide me with direction on where to start. And that's what we're looking for. So let me go through each assumption, and feel free to stop me when we get to one that you have input and/or question. We'll start with the revenue assumptions. The revenue assumptions, there are 4 of them that we typically talk about. The first one is the CPI. In the model, I will be using 1.9% for December 19 because that is a known number. But the model is a 5-year projection model, so I have to use or put in a number for the next 4 years, those numbers aren't known yet. So what I've given you here are 5 years of CPI and the average and a recommendation. So for 5 years, the average is 1.5%, and that's what I'm gonna recommend that we put in for the next 4 projection years. Please know, in January of 2020, when the 2019 CPI is announced, one of the first things I do is go into the model and update that year. So, again, living, breathing document, just a place to start. The sensitivity for CPI, every plus or minus 1% on the CPI is equal to plus or minus approximately $440,000. Any questions on CPI? No? Okay. Great. Move on to number 2, please. New EAV growth. This is another factor in the tax levy formula. At this time, I do not have any estimates from the tax assessors yet. I anticipate that I'll be getting those within the next couple weeks. We typically get them sometime in October. That way I can bring you the tax levy initial at the end of the month. So you have, again, 5 years of EAV new growth. Remember that the new growth is outside of the PTEL law, meaning the first year you get full tax credit for it as a part of the formula. After that, it rolls into existing EAV. EAV stands for equalized assessed value, and what it is it's the total dollar value of all properties in the Kaneland School District. The new EAV is the total value of all new properties in the Kaneland School District. You can see over the past 5 years, it's averaged 6.9 million, but it has consistently gone up. So I'm recommending using 7 million because of the 6.9 average, but if you want, we could increase that and not be so conservative. The plus or minus sensitivity on that to our budget is about 58,000 for every million that we're off. So for this time of the year, I like to start where we're at, but once I know what the new EAV is going to be in a couple weeks or a couple months, in December November, December, when I put it in to the model, I'll use what I know and then project out accordingly. Thoughts?
Generally, on all the revenue side, like last year we had the surplus. The vast majority of those monies were on the revenue, or the expenditures.
That's correct.
You were pretty, I don't remember.
Pretty tight on the revenue.
Was it less than a point, I think it was?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is relatively minor compared to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the sensitivity isn't huge, it's $58,000, so.
Yeah. The next one is even less impactful. It's our CPPRT. It's considered a local revenue. It does fluctuate with the economy, so I have no way of knowing what it's going to be. They announce the CPPRT in the summer. So when I give you the tentative budget, I generally am using the year before, but then when I give you the final budget, by that time I have the estimated amount from the Illinois Department of Revenue. At that time, I update it in the budget. So again, you've got 5 years. What my recommendation is that we use the previous year and then update it once we get it between the tentative and final budget. And again, this is all it is for Kaneland. It's generally between 250 and 300 some thousand a year. That's it on that revenue source. My voice. Okay, state and federal revenues. You've got a chart there for 5 years. The average over 5 years from the state is 10.8 million, and for the feds, 1.7. As you can see, the feds and the state are generally pretty consistent. Again, what I typically do is I put in what we are getting or planning this year in the model. For the tentative, I generally don't know, so I use that number. During the summer, when everything happens, once I get that information, I put it in there, and it becomes a part of the final budget. But it doesn't fluctuate very much from year to year. The majority of the federal revenue is grant, actually all of the federal revenue are our grants. So both Fran and Sarah, Fran for the IDEA grant, Sarah for the title grants, and Patrick, they build in a couple line items where if the grant goes up, they add to it. If the grant goes down, they take it away. At that time of the summer, that's easy to do in their planning. Then once they know the exact amount, that's the amount that then we put into the budget. And then they plan for it accordingly. So again, my recommendation for that revenue source is to stay consistent with past practice. As Ryan has said, it's generally worked well for us, but I definitely want to make sure if there's anything the board wants different, that you have an opportunity to have input.
I know you've been involved in the evidence-based funding stuff. Is there any rumors or innuendos of what might happen going forward with that?
You know what, Ryan? I haven't heard anything recent. The thing that I'm most interested in that hasn't happened yet, I asked Dr. Layden, he's heard about this. Have you heard, has that committee met yet on the hold harmless for that first 3 years? The last I heard, they had not. You haven't heard or, yeah.
No, I've
So-
not heard, nor has a number come out or a determination of what they're going to do with the next steps after the 3-year hold harmless was done.
Okay, which I think this year is the 3rd year, so I think they have to decide something. I'm very curious because of enrollments, because they've held school districts harmless. Well, some enrollments have decreased, while others have grown significantly. So I'm curious what impact enrollment will have on the formula. I imagine we will hear something at III in one of the legislation updates. I have to believe that they're going to have to talk about it very soon. Other than that, it's been pretty, not much happening right now.
Okay.
So, but that's one question I think about.
Okay.
So, unknowns, these are things that we talk about every year because they continue to haunt us. Mandated categorical grants, those are state dollars, so it's a part of that state revenue number up above. They typically pay those 4 times a year. Those are the ones that they're either late or some years miss a payment, but then make it up in a following year. You just never quite know what's going to happen from year to year. So that's just an unknown. I want to make sure the board recognizes that's a challenge. The pension shift, there's still some discussion out there on how are we going to solve the pension crisis. There hasn't been a lot of chatter yet through the legislators. Every year somebody has an idea, but oftentimes it's pushed to the back burner because they don't think they can get it through the courts as being legal. Property tax freeze is probably the thing that keeps me up at night. And I couldn't be more serious in Kaneland about that. We depend on that annual increase from our property tax levy each year to sustain the various programs and salaries and benefits and the things that we do for kids. If we have a bill that passes and freezes the CPI at 0%, we're going to have to address that. So far, it hasn't passed, so that's a good thing, but that is one thing that we watch carefully, because it would have one of the most significant impacts on us.
And I think we've shared some information with the board, too, that the governor's property tax committee has been meeting, and they will eventually have a recommendation, or at least some findings, to then move forward with either another committee or a recommendation by the end of the year, is when that committee was supposed to have something back to the governor.
So are there any other alternative, or versions of the plan? Is it all to reduce the CPI to 0? Because it almost makes more sense if they would freeze the rate, but if you had more people move in that had kids, so if your enrollment went up, you would get that rate from that number of homes or something. I don't know. It seems like I just wondered if there was some tweaking going on or some negotiating.
I've heard just
So
a
that you
couple
could capture
varieties. I don't believe that they've touched the rate yet. The reason why is the rate fluctuates with the CPI. They're dependent on one or the other. If CPI goes up, rate goes down, things like that. Actually, it's if EAV goes up, rate goes down.
Yeah.
So they haven't touched the rate yet because there's a inverse relationship there. So they've really only focused on CPI because that's what escalates, that's what gives us our new money.
Yeah.
And they also have, the one thing that they have kind of, where you say tweaked, is it 1 year they're gonna freeze it? Is it 2? Are there extenuating circumstances where some districts have that new growth, they need it? What about districts that have lots of fund balance? Do they need it? So I think there's some of those conversations happening, but the rate, I haven't heard much on messing, or tweaking that.
It just seems like if the EAV goes way up because you have a bunch of new residential that brings a bunch of kids in.
Right, you need it.
You know, it's okay to say you're gonna get the same rate per student or something.
Right.
But to say, you know, you have to now take this and educate, 50 more kids.
And shrink the pie,
Yeah.
yeah. So, like I said, this one keeps me up at night. So. All right, those are our revenue assumptions. I don't hear any concerns, so I'm gonna keep going. Or questions? Okay, let's look at expenditures. Our 5 largest categories of expenditures that we need to discuss in the overview tonight. Again, each of these will be separate, but the overview to get us started. Staffing, there are 2 things. One is, are we increasing or decreasing staff? At this point in the puzzle, I typically will put the same. So no increases, no decreases. However, throughout the winter, as the administration discusses staffing and enrollment fluctuations, oftentimes we'll bring you recommendations for additional staff, but sometimes we're able to take staff and just shift it. So it just depends on what's happening. I could plan for additional staff, but our enrollment, we'll see today is September 30th, it's still holding pretty flat. So at this point, I don't recommend additional staff. However, I know that we have some needs. So we can update the model once we know exactly what those needs are and once they're prioritized. But for the moment, we keep staffing the same. Then the other piece of that puzzle are salaries. I feel so excited that in our model, we can project out, it'd be 4 years of KEA salaries and 2 more years of speak salaries in the model. So that's pretty exciting. We haven't been able to do that for quite some time because it's like been year to year and changes. So that is really gonna help us with our projections being more accurate. So we'll put the exact percentage changes in those years that we can. Then typically for everybody else and all other years where it's an unknown, the board's philosophy has been just put a 0 in at this time so that we can see what's left over or what's under so that we know where we're at when we're all done. So that's typically been the philosophy. However, if the board wants to have discussion and have numbers put in there in any of those placeholders, I'd be happy to do that as well. And again, those are things that I can change very quickly if the board has questions at any point.
See, I would disagree with your recommendation, because it's mental math for everybody here to say, oh, we're in budget, but we forgot we gotta add X percentage for all the other people that aren't in here, so I would much rather that you use an average of either those people's traditional raises, because we always give raises, it's not, except for the years and years ago, so I'd much rather have a more accurate budget number that we look at and agree on instead of everybody guessing what that other piece is.
Okay?
So, for different reasons, I also would like a number in there. I think it sends an unequal message. I think it says, well, that we've negotiated, and I know they're known, but I mean, if you're somebody who is not a member of, an association, I think it sends a message that it's an afterthought. And so I would suggest maybe CPI, at least for the non-association employees and the administrators. And to me, it's more a matter of optics than a matter of math, but Ryan's point is well taken as well.
I would recommend, if we're using CPI, I would use for 2019, the 1.9%, and then the out years 1.5. Is that the number that does that work? And Madam President, do you have consensus so that I have direction?
Yeah.
Right, well, do you have any idea what kind of a sensitivity we're talking about here? If we say use 1.9 versus 2.9 or 4, do you have any guess as to what kind of numbers we're talking?
Yes, 1% of those remaining people is, hold on one second.
I'm impressed.
I think it's about 100, or 80 to 100,000
80 to 100,000.
For both groups?
for both groups.
Okay, so let's just say 100 for easy math,
Yeah.
just so,
Yep.
I guess
Wait, 1 second. It's 2 point, no. Call it 150.
150.
Yeah.
So I would rather be closer to whatever our historical average is versus, because we usually give raises above CPI. So if you take the average, how hard would it be to take the average of those groups of people last 5 years' salaries and use that for your place?
Easy. If you turn to page 5, I've got all this historical information there for you. Yeah, so I could easily do that.
Okay, that's what I would prefer.
An average of the what, last 5?
years.
I've got 10 on here, but I can certainly cut it to 5.
Yeah, because 10 takes into account the freeze years
Yep.
and the really lean years, just, all the way through 2013, kind of.
Okay.
So,
Could that,
you- go ahead.
any other people?
Yeah, so you guys are thinking average of 5 years would work for both of you guys?
So the concern though, is, and correct me if I'm wrong, right, Dr. Fuchs, is that when you put a number in there, that's an assumed get then for those groups. Is that true?
That has been our concern in the past, is if they're paying attention to what the board is recommending, and that we talk about our assumptions, that if they hear an assumption of X percent,
Right.
that then you're right, in their head, they believe that that is what will be given to them. That has been the past, and then if the board has to change, sometimes that may be difficult.
Sure.
Because we haven't done this before, perhaps it's a fear that is not
Unfounded.
unfounded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we
Is it
To
better
me,
than-
that's a good argument to do CPI rather than an
I was
average.
saying, is it better
Because
than the
CPI is
estimate?
cost of living, and we would at least always strive for that. And an average, we may have to adjust downward, and that would be,
Well, if we're talking, you said 150,000, after 5 years, we're talking $500,000, or more, we could be off in the budget if we leave nothing in there,
Yes.
Forecast, yeah.
forecast,
Yeah.
which is
So
substantial.
I don't think nothing is the answer necessarily, and maybe it is, but necessarily, but I also think, kind of under Teresa's point, maybe we estimate a little low just to be safe. I don't know, that's just my 2 cents.
I'd probably lean more towards CPI, but
I think then our margin of error is down to a couple hundred thousand.
Something less.
So, yeah, it's,
And I can give you a closer estimate.
yeah, so
Once
as long
I-
as there's something, I'm not really stuck on average versus CPI versus just something that will help get us closer.
Yeah, the CPI we don't make, it's kind of given to us in a sense, right?
Correct.
So it's more of this,
Let's start
it is.
Yeah.
you good with that, Meg? Yeah. All right, CPI, the CPI assumption used?
All right, so for admin and support staff, use CPI.
And then Julianne, when you put that in there, because it is new or different, maybe there's a disclaimer sentence that can follow that. It's a CPI based on, board action for accuracy or something like that, not to be an intended decision down there, just something.
Something, yeah, that's a great idea.
If that makes you feel more, it makes us feel more comfortable.
Do you also then want me to use CPI for those out years of the associations where we don't have an agreement?
Yes. I would think.
Yes.
Yes,
Keep it
yes,
consistent, right?
yes, yes.
Okay. And out years. Thank you. Got it. All right, next thing is, so that was page 5. The next one is the new curricular materials adoption. Each year, we set money aside for the curricular materials adoption. As you know, Dr. Mum and Mr. Raleigh will bring you the review cycle. Every year, we go through the cycle. Somebody's up for review, somebody's up for research, somebody's purchasing materials. We have found that $400,000 is what's considered their sweet spot for being able to fund most of the requests, if not all, and it can also be used that year to help with the research portion for the group that's coming up next. So 250, 300 was never quite enough. 400 seems to be sufficient. If we wanted to increase that, I can assure you our curriculum department can spend it.
You can accuse me of being argumentative or obstinate, but the next 3 items, I want some sort of justification other than this is what we've always done. And I want to spend $1 million on technology next year instead of the 800. Why is one number right versus the other? This is an opportunity for us to change maybe a philosophy or an idea of how we do things, and just saying this is what we've always done doesn't tell me why we should continue doing what we're doing. And that's a bigger question than just budgeting, I realize, but just because we've always done it doesn't seem to be a good reason.
So let's start with curriculum.
Yeah,
For this one in particular, it's the chicken and the egg theory.
okay.
Do you give them an amount and they spend to it? Or do you tell them to tell us what you need, and then you have to have them prioritize it and probably reduce?
And I guess, and I realize
So-
that I'm taking a whole bunch of stuff and stuffing it into 2 paragraphs, but if we decide we want to focus more on curriculum, and we don't tell you now to budget another $1 million for curriculum, it's never going to happen.
I would agree.
So,
I have some similar thoughts, just in the big picture, not really to do with this memo, but, when we look at how we're doing, like if we look at the evidence-based funding model and say, where are we short? Or if we look at our strategic plan and say, is there anything else we want to do with personalized learning that we weren't quite able to afford, or sometimes we hear about more capstone classes, or anything that might be an initiative that we'd want to focus more dollars on specifically instead of sort of a pro rata kind of approach or a last year approach. I am just curious with that kind of thinking. I sometimes feel like we don't get to that point when we're talking about expenses. I don't know if you guys are doing that without us hearing it, I'm guessing. Because I was saying, I think, to Dr. Layden when I was talking to him about that as well, that, we hear things about, like the technology budget absorbed ATOSA. There's, the learning management system got absorbed in the budget last year. So you take these lumped monies and I think you fit new things in them, and I don't quite always see the initiative and the strategic piece of it. But I struggle with that. I feel like a lot of times we approved last year, and is there a way to look at it in a broader sense?
So we haven't had the luxury of
Yeah.
having a lot of extra for many years.
I'm
We
gonna.
still don't have a lot of extra, but I just like that thinking, but yes.
I agree. So we start with, this is the minimum of what we believe needs. And then in December, when I bring you what the projections look like, if at that time you go, whoa, there's a lot of flexibility, I believe that might be a time when you could have the discussion that you're talking about. And we do have those discussions and prioritize a lot at the cabinet and the administrative level, specifically related to staffing. But again, where we had to cut to 5,300 just to make the budget balanced, that's where we have to start somewhere. And so that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. Where do we want to start? It doesn't mean we'll land or end here, but if we don't start somewhere, and I don't give you any projections, you won't know what you have to use to be flexible with.
See, and I'm gonna disagree with you because you brought up extra. It doesn't matter if we're at a zero-based budget. If we tell you to spend $1 million on technology, you'll figure out a way to, let's cut, I mean, so it's, I guess I'm more of the chicken than the egg as far as, because you're gonna make whatever we direct you to do to work, generally speaking, I mean, as best as you can possible. So if we want $1 million in curriculum, there'll be something else that suffers, but that's why I'm saying, what's the justification for keeping all of these at the same level?
So I think taking them one at a time, I think when, the fact that you said that they've decided, the curriculum directors have decided that $400,000 is the sweet spot.
Right.
So to me, that sounds like a good thing to have in the projections. And then if we're able to adjust at a later time based on initiatives that you bring to us, doesn't that make sense? And then we can also see in the projections how much extra money there is to perhaps put to that.
But if we decide as a board, we want Encyclopedia Britannica in every classroom, that's gonna fall into that 400,000 or, well, who knows what they cost now. But anyway, if we direct.
But this is just for the projections. This is just for the financial projections. This isn't the budget per se. The budget is separate documents, separate discussion. And so the actual budget number could be wildly different than the assumption in the financial projection model.
Have we really seen it change that much? If we use a budget number, it tends to kind of sort of end up there.
I think we haven't had the
Well, it doesn't matter if we have extra money or not.
luxury of having a lot of extra. We're gonna have a discussion later, which I think then that discussion and any strategic spending plan we come up with will then alter some of the projections, and then Dr. Fuchs can.
Yeah, we can change this at any time.
I guess I don't seem to be convincing anyone, so we'll move along.
I think when it comes to actual numbers, I agree with you completely. You know, that if there's something that we want and we need to increase it, and I certainly would hope, and I think you're saying that there's an opportunity for us to do that when the budget is drawn up.
Correct, because I'll bring you the financial projections in December. You'll see where we're at based on these assumptions. And if you go, oh, there's $500,000, how do we want to best utilize that? Strategic planning, curriculum, I mean, these are your major choices. How do you want to allocate that? Again, I can assure you, if we added money to curriculum, they would use it appropriately. If you added money to technology, they would use it appropriately. But right now, we got to know where to start so we can get to the what does it look like?
And I guess I was just more towards, it's a discussion of what's our priority. If we decide we want to focus on curriculum and we put another $1 million on there and tell Julianne to make it work,
Yep.
it'll work. So I see this as an opportunity to just look at instead of we've always done it this way, maybe we should think about why we do it this way.
Great question.
And I don't disagree with you, but I guess because this is the projection model, I guess to me, when we're looking at the projections, we can then say, what if we increase the curriculum amount to $1 million? And then she can plug the number in and say it would change it by this much.
We'd have to cut that.
And something else would have to.
And then something else, would have to be adjusted.
And I think maybe what part of what we're saying is just to try to continue to challenge that thinking, because I would kind of agree. I feel like there's a lot of last year, which, I know we've done a lot of cuts as well, so I also agree that we don't really have the luxury of having extra funds to spend, but it just is there a way to think differently? And especially us as board members, is there a way for us to think differently as well? maybe we need to keep that in mind in November and December, January.
As the topics are brought
As we
forth.
continue this.
Yeah, I mean, because you know how it gets split up in the timeline. I'll be having the budget calendar to you in the next board packet so that you can see. Otherwise, you know, we can do a board meeting with all of it, but hours and hours, because it takes some time to get through those heavy topics.
And it would be good to hear something like from the curriculum directors. At the $400,000 level, these are the things that we had to give up. These are the things we wish we had. I think that's the information that I feel like I'd like to have. I'd like to know, you know, are they keeping within that budget just because that's the number?
Right.
Or, like you're saying, is that the sweet spot? Is that where it works? You know,
That's what I'm curious to, what are,
do
I
they have a
don't know
wish list? What do
what's
they
being
think?
given up. And we kind of see that in capital expenditures, we know what's being given up,
That's
but
right,
not in a lot of
because
the
you
other
get the
areas.
priority list.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
so that might be a good way to say it.
So I have a light comment later on, and I like what you're saying, Ryan, and support it as well. And at the same time, Teresa brings up a good point. Would it also be prudent to take that idea to the administration and say, hey, listen, kind of along with what you were saying, if there are things in there that you want to pursue, whether it's technology, whether it's whatever, in the next coming years, if you will, maybe that's that little seed to be able to potentially come back at it and say, hey, guys, this is what we'd like to do, hence apply some additional funds.
And I believe that our administration has done that. Let me give you an example. We've been talking about the one-to-one initiative for several years. You knew well in advance that that's where we were headed. We just needed to get to a point where we could afford it, and we've done that. And so that's absolutely what the administration does, is we spend a lot of time prioritizing various initiatives, planning, things like that, and we bring those things to you. There are other examples. They are escaping me right now, but the one-to-one is the most significant.
And I agree with you,
Yeah.
totally agree with you, and yes, we did plan for that, because I've been here through the whole process. But I think to take us beyond that what I see is the 400,000.
Maybe we
Sure.
need the next one now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
And
We need the
personal-
next one. We
yeah.
talked about one for one,
That's
what's
right.
the next one?
Yeah, what is the next thing?
Personalized learning is a
Yeah.
significant goal in our strategic plan currently. We're in the process of revising. I have a feeling there's going to be some very exciting things coming from this spring's conversation, which then again will start to drive and plan some of the unknowns that we're wondering about tonight. Definitely. So,
All right, so we fine with 400 for now?
And thank you for the feedback, too. We understand
Yeah.
the number as a projection, but then kind of what you're looking for with the next steps.
I think sometimes too, it's harder, like it's easy to say, okay, one-to-one technology initiative means every kid has to have a computer. In curriculum, I mean, I know, there's probably an electronic textbook, and there's, costs associated with reviewing things and things like that, but I don't really know exactly where it can fluctuate and what types of things.
I think our gallery walk that we've had the past couple of years you've been to them?
Oh, yeah.
That definitely shows some of the very, very creative things that our teachers are doing, specifically with technology in the classroom. So I think those are some examples that you could draw from. And then there are others, but that's one example of how we get that information to you. But maybe there's another vehicle with which we can make sure you know and understand what is happening. Thank you.
Are we done, or are we going on to the next
We're
one?
gonna go on to the next one. And the next one is technology. For this one, again, this is the minimum recommendation. Again, each year, Tim tries to update servers, software, keep things current. I can't use the language he uses because there's a lot of technical terms, but he needs a budget in which to do that. When his budget is larger, he does more. When it's smaller, he prioritizes and does as much as he can with what he has.
This one might be helpful to see a multi-year. I know he has one, but I
Yeah.
think he usually comes with a one-year to us, just because his needs have been all over the board, and I don't even know fully what his needs are going forward. But just even when I look at, like teacher laptops, that's a fluctuation, so maybe he has things that he can offset it and keep it steady. But I'm also kind of curious. I don't know. He's
Yeah,
got-
I'll be glad to ask him for like a 3-year
Yeah, 'cause I
tech
think
plan.
he
The
has
one
it.
thing on the teacher laptops, please remember, when we did those last time, you all had me put those in the
Well, that's
financial
what I wasn't sure why it
projections.
says.
And we put them in there over 2 years.
Right.
They're already in there.
So is that, because that's in the recommendation as an example, replacement devices for teacher laptops?
To keep them in there, they
Okay.
were in there
So
from the last
800 plus the
projections.
laptops?
Pardon?
800,000 plus the laptops is what you're
Right,
saying?
and then
Okay,
set
that's not
aside, yep,
Okay,
definitely, because those were on top of, so I've got the 800
Right.
in there from year to year, and then the extra 250, I think, at the time, for
Right.
2 years.
I just
yeah.
wasn't clear how that
Yeah.
was, yeah.
here's an into the weeds question. All right,
Sure.
you said you've got 800 in there. Over 1 year, 5 years, what's the time period that it's?
From
over?
year to year,
Each year.
So
so
you've got 800
800 each year, and then the 2 years where we want to replace the teachers, there's extra.
All right, so that 800 is for,
And I don't have 800 in there right now. I believe the number that's in there right now is 7. Because what did I think it was 700 last year, so I increased this to 8 this year.
7:30.
So that's not for,
730,
so that's not for
730.
Chromebooks and not for teacher laptops,
correct,
but still 800?
yes.
okay.
Yes,
So-
because he needs that just to maintain laptops for administrators, things like that.
800 a year?
Teacher, what? I'm sorry,
800 a year for equipment or the whole technology
the
budget?
whole technology department.
Okay,
Back end, front end support, licenses, software, hardware, servers.
Salaries?
No,
No
this is
salaries.
not
That's
salaries,
not salaries, okay.
yeah.
all right. So we had talked about budgeting for replacement of laptops and blah, blah, blah in the future. If we stick $300,000 in technology budget next year, planning on spending it 3 years from now, we're gonna show a surplus in our budget how do you do that?
I got them in the years where we said we're gonna replace them, at year 3 and year 4.
So we have to come up with that money at that time?
I'm sorry?
We have to come up with that money at that time?
And that's where I'm going with this.
Okay,
So if we
go
tell
ahead.
you, hey, we're gonna need $1 million worth of computers 5 years from now, save for it, where would that money be saved?
I wouldn't be saving for it, you can't save for it.
Well, you have a fund balance of millions.
If you, that's not your operational financial projections.
But if I told you that 5 years from now, I want you to spend $1 million and I want you to have it,
Okay, so at that point then, I would, over 5 years, need to have what? 200 and some thousand each year? So you would need to show a surplus each year of at least that.
I understand.
That's how I would save that, and then I would put the expenditure of $1 million in year 5.
but where would you show that money? You'd show it in the technology budget overinflated by 200,000 every year?
No, $1 million in the 5th year.
Okay, I'm missing something here.
Would it be in our
How do we save money
funds?
How do you save money?
for a long-term project?
Surplus.
Revenues over expenditures on an annual basis.
I understand that, where's it
Fund
show up in the
balance.
budget?
It
Fund
doesn't-
balance.
Fund balance.
No, you don't, there's a line item somewhere in the budget that's $200,000 off because we have an extra 200,000. Where's that line item?
Fund balance.
Okay, let me try again. We have $100.
Yep,
We take in 110. Where, that extra, I said that wrong. Like at home, if you want to save money for a new car, you put it in an account. What account does it go into?
Cash.
Fund balance.
That's your fund balance is cash.
It's like your
So you-
savings,
you
savings, overall savings.
Fund
So
balance.
you put cash, you overestimate cash?
Well, you-
No, we don't
Revenues
budget
over
for-
expenses, and then,
Right.
so that's your income statement for the year, and then it's gonna sit in your balance sheet in cash until you spend it. So your fund balance for 5 years, your revenue over expenses will give you the $1 million to then,
Thank you,
But-
but yes.
And then
And
you'll
then
have
you just have to
deficit.
look
That
at
year,
the
you'll have
projections
to-
every year and say, but we're not gonna spend that money because it's gonna go
That year,
to
you'll
a
deficit
million.
spend by $1 million.
And I get that
Yeah.
part of it, but for the 5 years that you're saving it, it's showing up in the budget somewhere.
Doesn't have to, no.
What it's showing up as is $1 million in revenues, 900,000 in expenditures, and 100,000 in surplus going toward fund balance.
I see you're saying you want to designate it, like you're kind of wondering.
I guess that's, how is it
I
designated?
hear what
Like
you're
a
saying, 'cause-
technology fund balance.
Right,
Because
and a
you don't want to
buses
look
fund
like it's
balance
free to
and
be
a-
spent, because it's already earmarked for something, which I do think is kind of our issues with J3. Like, it looks like, I mean, we do have a fund balance, but we also have $8 million of capital expenditures. You know, like, it's kind of earmarked, but you can't see it, so that's a struggle. I totally hear what you're saying there.
Could you rephrase that for me again? Because you did a lot better job of explaining it than I did.
That we have more projected expenditures, capital expenditures, other needs than is sitting in our fund balance. So when you look at the money in the bank, you're like, it's already essentially spent because we have all these needs, but you don't see it. It looks like it's a pool of money, you know, that would be, that's excess, but it's not. So I think what you're saying is, how can we show that earmarked? How do we know how can we not spend it if we need it in 5 years? If we,
No, I guess what I'm saying is if we want to spend $1 million in 5 years, how do we save it over between now and that 5 years so we have it at that point?
You do a budget,
Yeah.
and in your budget, you budget for revenues greater than expenditures on an annual basis that produces the surplus. And each year that you have a surplus, when you get to year 5, you add those together, and now you have the money in your fund balance. Then as Shauna said, in year 5, when you want to spend it, that year, you'll have a deficit budget.
Okay. And I guess here's where you and I are not communicating.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's kind of a nebulous topic. If you're right, 5 years we've got money, we've got revenue over expenses. My thought is if we plan for it and tell the public that we're gonna buy a new roof for the school, then everybody knows for the next 5 years that, hey, yeah, we got extra money, but we already have a plan for where it's going and why we're doing that. We don't end up with an extra couple $1 million and don't.
That's what the strategic spending plan
J3.
is going to do.
because I think that's a challenge when you say you want to keep your fund balance at 45 days, but you also have a parking lot that needs to get fixed that exceeds your capital expenditures in a year. You're kind of like, how do I ever do that? You know, I mean, I think that's because you're going to need your fund balance to exceed 45 days to then be able to get to 55 days to pay for a parking lot to go back down to 45 days. You know, and you're kind of saying, how do you do that in a transparent way?
Right. How do you
That-
save the money over time so?
That doesn't look like you're, you know, because you're trying to comply with your policy as well, but you need to ever do those projects that exceed 700,000 for right now.
However, to throw a big wrench into it, boards turn over every 2 years. And
Yes.
if you're saving $200,000 a year, and all of a sudden, you're saving it out over 5 years, and in 4 years, your entire board could have turned over, and they have a completely different idea of what that is. It's just there in the fund balance,
It's not
and it
restricted.
doesn't get spent on what, because the current board would decide, and not
Yeah,
the previous
it's not
board that put
truly
the money
restricted.
in.
Right,
You get
it's
to
unrestricted, you
do the
get-
budget and the planning for the year in which you're
Annually.
seated.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point, Teresa.
Which is
So it
our
could just be all
obstacle,
for naught.
which is our obstacle year to year, that we can only spend, just throw a number, 600,000 for the repairs.
Yeah. Because we try to balance the budget from year to year, revenues as close to expenditures as possible. Has been our traditional, except for the past couple years, not too recent, but recent. It was a deficit budget, because we had to
But
narrow the gap.
if we're ever gonna bring our fund balance down, we have to have a deficit.
Absolutely, and that's in my next board memo.
That's in
It's in a
J3.
paragraph that says process.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true, Ryan. You
So-
got it, we're on the same page.
So I think sometimes the optics of saying, we're running a deficit budget this year or whatever, I think sometimes the public looks at that and thinks, well, the board isn't balancing the budget, they're not doing their job. And actually, we're doing the job of spending the tax money on curriculum, on technology, on things, rather than stockpiling it. And so the only way to do it is to run a deficit budget, but it sounds like it's always a negative.
Well, and the flip side of that coin is, well, they had an extra $1 million, why? Well, we did, but we needed a new roof on the high school, so we planned on that $1 million being spent 3 years from now?
Well, I think the board's been transparent with this conversation, and also when it is time for that $1 million after 5 years or now, the key is using the term the plan deficit as opposed to just a plan, or just a deficit. So when it's a plan deficit and we have that conversation, then it's clear that that is why we are going over intentionally because in a couple years or even next year, if we want to reduce the fund balance, it has to be a plan deficit. So that's targeted language that we're going to have to use regularly.
Yep, and again, that's in the next memo.
So we
thank
good
you.
with 800?
So,
I'll-
here's
okay.
what I,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I actually would like to see in technology something like you have in capital projects. I would like to see, this is everything, because I'm pretty sure that Tim could foresee a lot of these, he's like, okay, our server has a life or in a capacity of whatever.
He absolutely
I'm talking
does do
nebulous,
that.
like not in computer terms.
Kind of
But
techie.
something like that. And so he has these things and he's thinking, okay, in a couple of years, I'm gonna need this, in 3 years, and I'm gonna need this. We're gonna be moving, I don't know, we're gonna be transitioning to Canvas more, or whatever, all the techie stuff that has to happen. We're gonna need more, and a schedule to replace the laptops and things like that, so that we can see. And then if we can average that 5 year, then maybe the technology amount goes up.
I think it's an
because-
excellent idea, because one time I know we came in and tried to put, or give us the idea that he wanted to put Wi-Fi in our buses, and we told him no. Because let's take care of this other stuff, basically, we told him.
Well, and I think that kind of idea, as you kind of laid that out, Teresa, I think that in some ways goes back to Ryan's initial comment as far as the justification piece. You can kind of see it then,
Yep.
item by item, more clearly of kind of where the line was drawn, what might be pushed off for later expenditures, and what needs to be done right now.
And you could make the argument for every category, curriculum, we foresee this need, I'm sure you guys are good forward thinkers, I'm sure
Well,
that.
and we have the cycle. We know what's coming forward. Again, your directors of curriculum or educational services, technology and transportation do this work that you're speaking of. We just need to bring it in front of you.
Right.
It's not a practice that we've ever done, but it certainly can be done. It's just a whole lot more depth or details, or perhaps in the weeds, than the boards have ever asked for in the past. Which-
Hopefully, it's still
Yeah.
high level.
And not that it's,
Well,
not
when
that
you
it's,
go
not
through
that,
about
not
what
that they'd be
Teresa's
stuck
saying
to
with
it.
Technology,
You know.
that's not high level.
I feel like what we are, and I could be wrong because I'm trying to visualize what he does. I feel like he gives us a 1 year and it's just bumping it out to the 3 years. But maybe not. Yeah, maybe it depends what we're visualizing. Yeah. Oh my goodness. All right. Are we moving on from the 800?
Thank you.
yes,
Okay.
I'm good.
I've never seen.
Here's what I heard.
Okay.
I heard
Thank you, Ryan.
800 is fine, but we want a multi-year tech plan
Yes.
with dollars.
All right.
Thank you.
Right, because we just grew
I
from
did, because I was.
7 to 800,000, right?
Yes, I believe it needs to be increased, just slightly.
But we
We'll show
were
that.
at 5,300, 53,000, whatever, 530,000
Yes.
before. So we made a big leap
Technology?
Yes.
in there.
The 530, actually, Shauna, 530 plus the 252, the Chromebook lease, that's included in the 800.
So the Chromebooks and the 800, the teacher laptops are not.
That is correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because the teacher laptops aren't ready yet, they're in a couple more years out.
Right.
So that's what our lease is costing us, 230,000
252,
a year?
yes,
With the student fees too, though.
right,
Offset some of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you still have to budget the expenditure
Sure.
for the whole amount,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
The revenue offset.
Can I ask a question? Just
Sure.
really quick. You know how we hear about, in kindergarten, they have X number of tablets that the kids use for this
Yeah.
and that, and does that come out of the technology budget?
Yes,
Okay. So that kind of thing would be something else that would be good to see, because I think we don't hear about that specifically.
right,
And so we don't, unless you go to the gallery walk and you see what they're doing with the
Yeah.
stuff, you don't know.
no,
So-
not at all. And you used to see it when we were 5-1, 4-1. You used to see it when we were trying to buy some more devices. Remember how, and now we're 3-to-1. I remember the charts that we used to share with you because we were adding, but we got to a point where we had enough right before we went to 1-to-1. So, yeah, you have seen that kind of information before as needed.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question, Tricia. So what percentage of the tablets or what have you, is, or do, in the past, I've seen history where the PTAs, PTOs, if you will, would buy tablets for classes or rooms or what have you and such. Does that still exist? And if so, again, back to my question, is there a certain percentage that we have to supply, or is that still coming? I know that's not a given that it's coming every year, but is there a percentage there that you can kind of?
Sure. It's a very, very small percentage that they help offset the cost. It might be up to 10 or something iPads a year. And then our budget does, Tim's budget, the tech budget, does help to make sure that we're balanced at all schools.
Okay.
So, and yeah, we almost had that list ready, but we were waiting for a couple more groups to get us the information. I'm hopeful to have it to you from last year at the next meeting.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So when a PTO, or a PTN, do they get to decide on their own without a building administrator okaying, like, can they say, we're gonna buy you 10 tablets, because then we're on the hook for all the other elementary schools?
They work together with the administration, absolutely. And then, just so that you know, those things are ordered through our tech department, so that our tech people can support them. And then what happens is we pay for it, and then the PTO reimburses us. That way those devices become a part of our inventory, covered under our insurance, all of those things.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we take good care of those. All right, next one is school buses. With this, I always tell you what our history has been. In addition to this, I understand that we want to now look at the repairs. The transportation department is preparing that data for this discussion. I told them to have that ready by December, and so I'm hopeful that, again, we have a head mechanic. It's the head mechanic and the director of transportation, along with myself, who meet on an annual basis to determine which buses we want to trade. We do that based on the head mechanic's knowledge and recommendation, along with the director's recommendation and input for mileage. We'll get that data to you so that you can see why we picked the buses that we picked for replacement.
So I would like to see the assumption on buses to be smaller, if not zero, because I think it should be based on those needs, and it is. So I'd like it to be not earmarked there so that we can see what's left, so that if we need, 6 buses or 2 buses, I would like that to reflect. I don't know if, and I guess maybe input from other board members, whether it's 0 or whether it's just pared down to maybe 2 or something like that, so that we can adjust it to fit the actual and I know we will, but I guess I'd like to see it in the projections.
I think your opening comment was based partly on a comment that I made to Dr. Layden earlier in the day, which is fine. But,
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I don't mind at all. 2 years ago, I know that we started using a software program that said we're spending this much on that bus. And based on that information, we should be able to look at the buses and say, 10 of them are garbage and we need to get rid of them, or they should be able to project out in some fashion how many buses. And to me, this number feels like we've done it this way, so we're just doing it again. Whereas there's not the justification that I talked about earlier, and it should be, the information should be available through your software.
I agree.
Okay.
So here's some things to consider with what we've talked about tonight about buses in particular. One is if you happen to buy 0, you have 62 buses, and you're gonna end up in a year where you have to buy 10 because because they're so old and have so many problems, and they're costing you more than that. If you buy 10 buses because you look at what you need and you don't cut it off, this is, again, my argument of the chicken and the egg. What's the budget? And now let's figure out what goes within that budget. Or if we look at what's needed, we've got buses on the road with, I didn't bring the mileage with me tonight, but with 150, 80,000 miles. And so, do you want to have a bus replacement cycle that you can depend on so that the buses turn over, give or take, every 8, 9, or 10 years? And if so, then the math is how many do you have divided by number of years, and that's how many you should turn over a year? Or do you want great fluctuations from year to year on how much you spend on them so that you have flexibility to use the money on an off year for something different, like tech, like curriculum? What is your preference? The administration's preference has been stabilize it so that you know what you can depend on, so that from year to year, if you have extra, you can do something different. But if it truly is on a need basis, and some years you need more than others, more than what you see here, then you can plan. Well, you can't plan because you don't know from year to year if you're going to need 10 or 5. That's why we pick a number in between, so that those buses turn over on a minimum.
Okay, so
Yep.
I think sometimes if we use the assumption of 5 buses,
Sure.
we can find 5 buses that we want to replace. Do we need to replace them? Maybe not. So like you can look at the repair schedule and say, maybe one of those buses with 150,000 miles on it hasn't been in the shop at all. So maybe you keep it. I guess I don't like to say a bus's end of life, is at when it's over 100,000 miles. I guess I would rather we would look a little deeper into it and say, and I get what you're saying about
Right.
having some or not, but I guess I would just like I would like the assumption to be, I would like it to be fewer than 5, because I think, especially as we've had several years where we've replaced several buses, quite a few buses, we should be getting to a point where we don't need 5 replaced.
And then we're gonna look at the repair bills too, because that's what I think is gonna be the telling story. You very well may be right, but I think we definitely need to have the analysis.
But if we've made the assumption of 5, I think that a transportation director, and I'm not saying this, our
Sure,
particular
just a
transportation.
human.
But a human could say, well, the next one that might go might be that one. Let's just go ahead and replace it, because they put the money aside.
Which happens in all budgeting. It doesn't have to be buses, it could be,
Any part of it.
Right.
yeah. But we shouldn't, since 14, we've replaced roughly half the fleet. We should see a huge drop in our maintenance costs. And I want to see that actually bears out, that we're spending all this money on buses, we're saving it on the repair bill. It should be dropping correspondingly.
I would agree. I'll be bringing that information to you.
So I
And-
don't know that 3 or 5, I don't know what the right number is, but.
Yeah,
see your
I
point.
don't know the number either, but.
Well, this is a challenging one, because if you have a year like 15, 16, where you need 10 of them, and you don't have a placeholder of something, at least 4, 5, some number, or 300,000, just some number there, then the year when you do need it, that is then going to go into curriculum, it'll go into technology, and if you don't know it far enough in advance, which buses might be harder to project out than technology might, or a personalized learning institute, those kind of things, you might be able to project that out and plan that, but buses, because of the nature of them, might be harder to turn over. So I think I think some of that number that you can bring back, Julianne, will help us try to determine if there is an appropriate placeholder for this discussion, and then when we get there, the actuals to be able to change. Because again, as a placeholder, I think it's a good jumping off discussion, then see what the numbers bear out.
Right, and I think the 10 was that was a planned deficit because we were spending down a fund balance.
That plus the
Okay.
year 12-13, we only did one, and the year before that, it was 0. So our bus fleet was in desperate need of buses, because we didn't have any money. And so you're absolutely right.
But at some point, we
Thank you.
should probably catch up.
Well, and that's
And then we
exactly
don't
what we
need to
did.
budget for 5.
Exactly, that's exactly what we did that year that you're talking about. The other thing, in addition to mileage and the repair bills, is I really believe that we need to take the advice of our head mechanic, at least listen to his recommendation
Oh, yeah.
at some level, because it sounds weird, but those buses are his babies. He could tell you everything about them by number, as if they were his children. So we need to at least hear him out on his recommendation as well.
And I
Well,
think
I think
that's
it's
true,
really
and I think
important.
just for the assumptions, though, we would never, like, dismiss his expert input. But
Right.
on the assumptions,
Sure.
excuse me, we just may not need to be as high as we are.
There you go. Yeah.
And
Well-
like you said, we've got the information to let us know.
Do we expect the director and the director at the very minimum to be here that night?
Well, that's what I think we'll need to talk with Dr. Layden about, on how to plan this, because based on our discussion tonight, I believe you want to see the educational directors, I believe you want to see the director of technology, and I believe you want to see the director of transportation, and have these discussions with the people actually making those choices and decisions. And so we need to plan your schedule so that we're respectful of your time in the meetings.
Well, but the issue needs to be close to the same time as you plan it, because that could be a lengthy conversation.
So I have a question along the lines of whether we put a budget in there or figure it out and then we add the number to it at that time, if you will. And so Todd, I appreciate your comment and in reference to what do I do, right? It's a funny situation. So my question is, and you may not have the answer, but the numbers in an average, what we're doing, about 5 or so on an average? Is that keeping up with, I know there's been, however you digest how to figure out which 5 it is, whether it's mileage or repair or what have you. Is that a number that, I mean, there's a threshold somewhere,
I
right?
would think 6, 7, or 8 would be better than 5, because it would shorten up the timeline.
So if you think a bus lasts 10 years, it's 6,
That's right.
just because that's an easier math for
That's
me.
exactly
Because there's
right.
60 buses, because there's 60,
Yeah.
62 buses.
I don't know how long a bus should last,
Right,
but
but that's exactly the math.
I also don't think we should be trying to figure out how long a bus lasts, because different bus will last longer than
Yeah,
another.
but
Just
in a
like
five-
one of my cars lasts, is up over 200,000 miles, and
But
my
in a
other one
five-year plan, it's
conked
not-
out at 100,
in a 5-year plan, it's not 0. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, we're
Not
thinking
0,
about
but-
5 years. I mean, so we're talking about what number to put in for 5 years.
Right.
You know, next year you might say it's 0, but you won't say it's 0 for 5 years. So however many you want to replace in the 5 years is kind
But
of.
you would also agree, though, that the way you take care of your vehicle will potentially make it last longer.
Correct.
Should.
And I would hope that
I
we,
mean, remember one time I asked, what are you putting in these, and there was no record being kept. to
Right.
a certain
But now we
degree,
do.
and now
We do,
Right.
we do.
That's right.
okay.
So we need 5 years of numbers. What do we want to go in for 5 years? $300 a year.
What's the question, I'm sorry?
What number do we want for each year for 5 years? I'm saying 300 a year is my proposal at the moment.
Which brings you
A used
what,
bus,
like,
a one-year-old bus
4
is
buses?
about $100,000 when we can find them.
80,
80?
yeah, minus the trade, yeah.
All right, so my hypothetical counter proposal would be, we've got 62 buses, is my.
I believe so.
And we're gonna say the last 10 years, so every 6 years, we gotta buy a bus, so 6 times 80,000 is 480,000.
So you're going 480? Yep.
Which brings you down to 6.
Minus your trades, and you're at 400. Well, you probably only get about 5,000 to 7,000 a bus, so you're a little over 4.
So can we play with that number, and then when the repairs and the report, if you will, comes through, we'll compare it against what that does to us?
Absolutely.
Right.
Tonight
I
is
just
an initial
don't-
conversation.
I just, and, okay, I trust this is happening. However, I would like to, to hear you say that, that you're not, that, you know, you're not encouraging to replace up to the max that we make the assumption for, just because you can, not you personally, just because it's in there. And so the mindset would be, I've got 5.
So let me tell you
And
that
it just
last
bothers
year,
me because sometimes it doesn't need to be 5, and I want to be sure that we're getting the actual, without us having to get in the weeds. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Last year, there were 2 other buses that they wanted to get rid of, and I said, no, we can only do 5. So I assure you, I'm not encouraging, I'm holding them back.
So what number should we use for 5 years, for now, for tonight?
Yeah.
So,
I suggest leave it at 400.
400?
I second it.
I mean, I am all of the mind in being informed to be able to make the decision instead of, okay, here we go. So, kind of
I
understand
mean,
where you're
these are
coming
just
from.
the assumptions, I get that.
so I'm thinking ahead a year. Next year, when we do this conversation, I'm thinking next year, that might be the time when we bring some folks in with the data. What you're gonna find though is some of that data won't change much year over year after you do it, depending on how long your service is. But nonetheless, it'll be updated each year.
Yeah, I guess I would, and I realize it might cause a shift in when things are done. Because we do
Yeah.
things toward the budget, but if those people could do it for the projections, then we could get a better idea, just for the one
We
time
certainly
to
can.
readjust everything.
Yeah, we certainly can. Because they prioritize, they all do. They know their budgets, they know what they need, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they've all put into that. You're getting this as the high level of what their work is day to
Right.
day.
Okay. I'm good.
Perfect. Let's move on, we have one more. Capital projects, and maybe this one is easy to say, let's wait until the next decision is made. But I still think, even though we're gonna wait and maybe change or tweak something, that the baseline is at least 700,000. We have so much that needs to be done, large projects, that I can just name them. They're all on the list, you've seen the 5-year plan. The plan is in the process of getting updated, but again, a minimum number of where do we start here is what I'm recommending. The next conversation may shift that or may not, but at least I wanna recommend 700.
When you say next decision, you're talking about the analysis of what you need.
The strategic
J3.
spending plan, the
J3.
next agenda item. I'm sorry, I'll be more clear.
All right.
And I do think about it in 2 buckets, and so I think you need a typical amount in here. And if there's a planned large item that we take care of in J3, that's fine. But I mean, you do have to have a recurring amount.
From
That's
year to
probably
year
at least
on
700. So
Do you
that's,
know off the top of your head, what the pushed off amount is?
I believe over
Think-
5 years, it's about 8 million.
so if you do 700 for 5 years, that's 3.5, so you're still short 8 million minus 3.5.
All right, so.
I mean, I would,
4.5.
I don't know.
You would do more?
Yeah,
You're like, yeah,
That's-
yeah.
That's kind of where I'm going.
It's a fair,
Didn't Mark say that a roof was $1 million? Yeah,
close
that-
to it.
I think a
Depends
million
on
would be
school.
good.
It depends,
but- okay,
yes.
Let's say I'm
How about
close.
the parking lot at Meredith is $1 million?
Okay.
Yeah, that was
How do you
one.
get that?
How do you ever get that done if we don't over budget for it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what,
So-
yeah, that's
so
J3.
700,000
Yeah.
isn't enough.
So unless J3 catches you up with those big projects, I I agree with you. No, well, I hear you, yeah.
Is this a fair statement that each school selects their one or two items that they would like to repair in that school? I'm just picking a number,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
And
So,
plus
yes.
selected.
other things.
Let me take you through the process so that
Okay.
you're clear on how that works. Mark and I go and sit with each of the principals. He has a very large database or spreadsheet with all of the systems in there. So the process is threefold. The first thing we do is we go through the projects that were done just this previous summer. How did it go? Did we finish it? Is everything fine? The next thing that we do is we go through his spreadsheet. He tells us, your parking lot's due, your playground is due, your roof is due, your carpet is due. I mean, I can go on, all the systems. The third step of it is, we've come here today, what have we not talked about that you want to make sure we know about, because you live in your building, we don't. So that's their opportunity. At that point then, we have the large list across the district. Before we leave that meeting with each one, we say, if you had a pick of your projects, what are your top 3 priorities? Because there's a list for each building, if you go back and look at the plan. What are your top 3? At that point then, we know the top 3 for each of the buildings. At that point, he and I sit down and try to figure out what's manageable, what fits in the budget, what has to be done. If you remember that capital plan, we always say safety. So what on here is safety? We have to do the life safety projects. What do we need to do to protect our assets? For example, parking lots, you can let them go, but then you're gonna look like Meredith. But if you take care of them, you can extend their life. So nobody likes to talk about parking lots when you're talking about educating kids, but we have to. And so, we go through that process and then we bring you our recommendation, but before we bring it to you, we bring it back to the entire administrative team. We show them what the whole list looks like. We ask them, does this priority make sense to you? Is there something down here that needs to be moved up? Or is there something up here that needs to be moved down? We have that entire discussion. Things change at that table. We don't need this, we could do that, oh, they really need this. It gives them a perspective of the entire district. Once we bring it to the entire administrative team, then we bring it to the board. You all look at it, and then we bring it back to you based on your feedback. If there was questions or feedback you needed, then we bring it back to you for approval. So it goes through a fairly thorough process by the time it gets to you, and then by the time you make that final decision of what gets done.
I remember us pushing the carpet.
Yes,
On
back
and
and back,
on.
and we
And
finally.
like, we have to do this.
Right.
I can appreciate what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Thank
So
you.
indeed, there is a process, yes, I did simplify it, that there's, bring me your first 3, if you will.
Yeah.
But, and correct me here if I'm wrong, but doesn't each school have, like, say the elementaries?
They don't need much right now.
They have their playground.
Right.
They have their carpet. They have their, throw the safety out of the way, because we don't have a choice of those. We have to do those anyway. And then maybe whatever other things, they have those things. Compared to, the middle school has additional things also. And then going up to the high school, then you have a lot more other things. And if you ask that, those bodies, principals, what have you, to select their top 3, there are things that continue to be, I don't want to say neglected. They just can't pick because they obviously want to go towards the school type of stuff, where there are things that need to be done. And hence, where I'm going with this is there's some things I believe that should be separated from, like, the high school, that needs to be in a category of itself, that we need to get done, AKA the track. We have not done anything with that track, and it is falling apart. I know I had that agenda already. I know we received an email this morning and stuff, but I had that already.
It's been on the list, and let me tell you, the high school prioritized their classrooms over their track when they had the opportunity. Granted, the track is a whole lot more money, so there hasn't been a lot of opportunities, but they have redone a lot of classrooms that are used every day for educational
Hence my
purpose.
statement, hence my statement.
Right.
Right, just for, what's the track gonna cost us, $1 billion, $1 million?
Call it 600 at this point.
Okay, so 600,000. So when we said we pushed off $8 million worth of stuff because we haven't, this 700,000 obviously isn't enough. And going back to where I started this conversation hours ago, I think we should double it and then you figure out where to lose the rest of it.
So I wanted to mention too that, like in the area, there's been there's a real cautionary tale. In Hinsdale, they neglected capital projects for years and years, and they ended up with a horrible situation, and they ended up having to go to referendum, and the people weren't, I don't remember if it didn't pass the first time, and then they came back and said, well, we're gonna get rid of extracurriculars and sports, and wouldn't you know that they didn't. So, it's important. It seems like the education doesn't include the facilities and things like that, but you gotta,
We have tried to balance.
it can affect
And we've
things.
done that with a very minimal amount of money per year. If you'll recall, it's only been a couple years since we had a $3 million deficit.
Right.
It's only now that we have something in which we can talk about.
But no, see, I disagree with that statement. If we had $0, we're at an absolute zero budget, and we told you to spend another 700,000 on the buildings, you'd figure out where to lose it. So don't use a surplus as an excuse to why we haven't done something in the past. We just haven't decided to do it.
Okay.
So should we pick the amount now, or should we go to J3 and come back?
Before we go there, I want, for completeness, I know I
Yeah.
mentioned the track, but Gail and I even emphasized those bathrooms. Those bathrooms are horrible inside the high school. And then also the field house, or the field, if you will, or the football field and stuff. Those bathrooms, you can only fit 3 people in there. I know we bring in the toiletries, whatever things are called and stuff, but that's just a patch. I mean, we need to put money into it and fix it, add to it.
But when you look at
It's
that,
all-
and then you look at a boiler that needs replaced, or a roof that needs replaced, I'm
No,
gonna
no,
vote for the
I
boilers
understand,
and the other
I
stuff over the
understand.
bathrooms in the stadium anytime.
I understand that, and there, again, that's why I said we need to separate some of these things from allowing, and having to force the school to, and actually force the school, these are your student affected type of things. And this is, like you mentioned, Hinsdale, these are the things that potentially, I don't wanna call it neglecting, but just we haven't able to get to. But we need to.
But it goes back to what I said of, we need to decide, and the administration, the board, all of us need to decide, do we want to plan on that 400,000 for education, or do we want to plan on 2 million for facilities, or we want, I guess I want the discussion to be the chicken and the egg to be the result of where we go. And I
So
feel
I
like
think
it
what
hasn't-
I think we need to need to plug a number in here and move on to J3,
Yes.
because we're all talking about J3 without being on J3.
Correct.
So what number do we want to pick?
Double.
I'd
right,
say
Ryan's been
I'd
outvoted.
say a cool million. An even million, because of the math is easy, but,
I'll go with
I
double.
don't know. I'm
I'll
just,
go with double.
I said no to him.
Say no to 2 of us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Aaron, what do you think? You know we say double, no?
Go ahead, Aaron. Help us out, Aaron.
Julian, can you tell me why you chose 700,000?
Because I needed to wait for the discussion. that we're having.
Yes.
But we can't move there unless.
That's a great answer.
My
Table
problem
it.
is, I say a million, I say
table it.
a million five.
Table it. All right,
Table
we're
it.
gonna table it. Do you need a motion, or are you good?
I don't,
All right, so we'll come back.
I think
to
we
this.
do need a
We
motion
don't.
to table.
well,
we?
Oh, well, just to
I
give her
do
the
have a
recommendation.
motion
Oh,
on
okay.
here to use these assumptions,
But we've
but
changed some of them.
you've changed some,
Okay.
so the motion should probably be adjusted.
Based on an updated conversation
It's not a
tonight.
required thing, and it's flexible, so I will take back what you've told
The
me.
feedback.
Exactly, and use that accordingly.
Are we fine to give her feedback
So-
and not a motion?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe,
I'll always do that.
Okay.
yeah.
So then after J3, we don't have to come back and revisit J2
You
to
will get
close
that
out
right.
J3,
It's not an
we can
official
get it.
tabling,
Okay.
it's just, we gave guidance.
Okay, so at the end of J3, we can just give us that number.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right,
Thank you.
J3.
Yep, J3, I want to give this was a little bit of a challenge in a couple of ways. I think it'll probably become even more challenging in a few minutes. But it was a challenge in a way that, number one, as we sat down, we looked at the amount. So if you look at the opening paragraph that was put together, $12.7 million or 80 days is the fund balance as of June. With the auditor coming up here shortly, we'll get that updated amount. But roughly, that's $5.5 million over the policy right now of 45 days. Go ahead.
All right, so the policy says that at June 30th, we're supposed to have 45 days worth of money left in the account to operate the school for the next 45 days. Am I right on my dates?
It's at any point in the year, we're supposed to have 45,
It says
right?
at the lowest point.
Lowest
Okay.
Oh.
in June.
All right, and we get the money, I'm gonna be off on the dates here, but, so 11 and a half months a year, this policy is irrelevant because we get our big payments from the state twice a year, so this policy
taxes.
comes into effect for about 2 weeks.
I concur.
So, to me, the policy is, who cares? I mean, the 45 days is arbitrary because we're talking about something that applies for 2 weeks a year.
And the policy is supposed to evoke this discussion, I think.
Right.
Yes.
So that's what we're doing.
I just want to make sure everybody
No.
understood what
The timeline.
that 45 days means.
But we keep it because it helps with our ratings with Standard & Poor's, right?
Yeah.
If we go to.
We need a fund balance policy.
You're right.
I'm not saying to get rid of it, I'm
Okay.
just saying that. I
The
want-
state
You
recommends
said it was
90
junk,
days.
so I was just clarifying.
It's a great
Maybe I was
policy.
a little too loose with my language.
Yes.
Historically, how do we get to 45?
Historically, several years ago, I can't remember what year we did it, maybe 2011, 12, could have been
It was
13,
before-
14, somewhere in there.
We
Right
started
before I was
talking
on the
way
board.
Okay.
It was
Were you
before
on
me.
FAC at the time?
No, so 5, 6, 7 years ago, probably.
Okay, so FAC spent a year and a half talking about what is the appropriate amount of days cash on hand for Kaneland School District. They went back and forth, did research, brought in experts, etc. They landed on 45 days at the lowest point. We brought that proposal to the board, and at that time, the fund balance policy was established, because prior to that, there wasn't one. But now our auditors look for that as a part of their checklist,
Sure, okay.
and before they did not. It's,
So is 45 like a compromise, of like some would come in at 90 and some come in at 30 and say, well, Solomon, that's what the baby kind of thing?
yes,
Okay.
because, 90 days is what the state recommends. 30 days is what some FAC members felt was just fine
Okay,
for a rainy day.
okay.
And there are also two very different philosophies. There's a philosophy that, our taxpayers are paying the money in now, and so all the money should be utilized now toward the education of the students in the district, because they're paying it now, so you don't want to stockpile it, it's.
That's right.
So that's why there were some people who said zero is, what we, on the FAC, they were like, no, zero isn't,
Right.
is the right number, because we should spend everything.
And along those same lines, there's state conversation because of the fund balance in certain districts, not ours, in certain districts is so exorbitant. I think it's Representative Crespo is trying to get some traction on a bill that would lower the state amount from 90 days to something else. So they're just trying to, those that are, like Teresa said, those that are paying their taxes for their students right now, or their programming right now, or the schools right now, that stockpiling in certain districts is being frowned upon with certain legislators, so you may see or hear something in the next session where that's going to be addressed and/or changed, so it may even impact what we do with our policy too, depending on what that number is.
Julianne, if I remember right, when the policy went into effect, we didn't have enough money to meet the requirement of the policy, and it took a while to.
It did take a year in order to get there. That is correct. The FAC was concerned that they set a policy, the state stopped making payments, and all of a sudden it was like, are we even gonna meet the 45 days? So it has fluctuated.
And then the fact that we have a policy, as far as Standard & Poor's and ratings, the only time that is even relevant is if we decide we want to go borrow money we're gonna bond and issue.
That's correct, and refinance, which your next opportunity to refinance is 2025. We don't have any other bonds that are gonna get called until then. We've refinanced everything we can.
So, just to carry that, so let's say we
Sure.
want, I say, spend $10 million, which takes us under our policy, and because we're not in compliance, it's not really gonna hurt us in a practical sense.
I don't believe it will, except for the financial profile score, which again is just a score, not just, it's the score that the state gives us for being financially
Responsible.
responsible. Thank you.
Okay, but if they give us a bad grade, it's not like they pull our funding or anything, we just get a bad grade?
That's correct, as long as we have a plan for that bad grade,
Okay,
because otherwise they could, I don't envision it, but they could do an oversight panel and things like that. But for this, I think it would be okay.
okay.
I would want to kind of think about it a little bit longer.
No, that's fine, I'm just
Yep.
asking in general terms, not.
Yeah.
And I believe our own policy says, lays out steps that we need to take if we fall below the 45, which is really just think about it, consider it, and talk about it, and then make a decision. And
That's
it's,
right.
it's not
It's-
like you have to go back, you have to do anything. It's like you just have to be cognizant and have a plan.
Have a plan. I would agree with that, Teresa. Absolutely.
So a couple things, a reminder, this is the planning for 2021, just so that that's clear. And then if you look on the first page, numbers 1 and 2, I want to highlight, because as I shared, as Julianne and I had conversations about this, or even as we started in July with board members at different times, just once we knew the fund balance was going to grow and there was going to be the increase, what could we do? What would a plan be? So as Julianne and I, Dr. Fuchs and I talked initially, one of the thoughts was consider the one-time versus recurring, and then some combination therein. The one-time would be structurally and financially easier to do, whereas one-time you're going to have to plan budget, you're going to have to account for the impact or the offsets in the future. So that's, I know we just had an in-depth conversation on J2, but part of it would be, is there some direction from the board on one-time versus recurring? Because I think we just had a lot of conversation on different topics, from capital to curriculum to technology, busing, what to do with those. So I don't think that needs to be part of this, because we kind of had it, I think, and the direction to bring back some of those things itemized a little more clearly. And then number 2, the timeline, because with the 45 days, if we plan this and want to look at it, does the board prefer, with the 45 days, to get down there in 1 year, in 3 years, 5 years? Those were the kind of things. So I think if we have some direction on one-time versus recurring and the timeline, we can do the planning. If you look on the very last page, page 3, if we have that direction, we can go from the board, we can go put together capital, technology, and curriculum over that period of time for November of 19 and December of 19, and bring it back to the board for more conversation, for approval, and then that way it guides us. Because as we sat down to start having the conversation, we weren't sure if we should put it over 3 years or 5 years, if we should do it all at once and do all of the capital projects. Because as Shauna talked about the math earlier, that difference of $5 million on the long-term capital, that could almost just take care of the capital. But I don't know if that's what the board wants to do immediately and initially, or if there's just more conversation on a timeline based on some other factors. And I know we've been here a while, but I would like, Julianne, if you don't mind now, from the administrative considerations, and then a couple items or highlights on the second page, just to talk about what our next strategic plan, talk about some of the outside of the capital costs, some of the other things that might be a consideration for us to hear from you, and also for us to be able to bring back in recommendations in November and December. So Julianne, do you want to
Great.
talk through a few of those?
Sure. Thank you.
Yep.
The capital plan, we're planning to bring that to you in November. Last year when we updated it, we were around 8.6 million over 5 years. We did do, quite a few projects last year. It was about 700-some thousand. So, we knock off a few projects each year. That is an area where it's one time, but there will always be capital plans, or capital projects, but we do have some serious needs. Pedro mentioned some of them. I would say Mr. Payton would tell you that the HVAC systems at the high school and John Stewart are in desperate need of replacement things, and those are expensive. We all know about Meredith parking lot. We all know about the track, the bathrooms, inside and outside. I mean, there are a number of large projects that we can pick from. The fund balance that you're trying to spend down, generally speaking, I would consider it to be one-time resources. And so I would caution us on using it on recurring expenditures. However, there may be some valid reasons why we would want to, and then we would build them into the projections and the deficit. And then each year, if you did a recurring, what I would suggest is that each year you reduce the amount of recurring by absorbing some of the new monies into those recurring, so that over a period of time, the budget has absorbed it. Just doing that carefully.
Give me an example of what something like that.
Sure. So perhaps we need another maintenance person because our buildings are aging and we can't keep up.
Okay.
So you would put that salary in the first year. It would still cause that deficit because you're reducing the fund balance. Say it was at 50,000 for a round number. The next year, we take 10 or 20,000. You still have that position, but now your deficit is only 30 or 40,000. Then the next year, your deficit is only, so that you wean yourself into absorbing that position.
What's the benefit of doing that as opposed to just putting it in a budget line item?
There's only so much money.
You're gonna take something away?
Yeah, you have, at some point, you're gonna set a planned deficit amount. And if we want something like a position, whatever that position might be, it's gonna have to come from somewhere.
Right, okay,
So if it happens to come from that fund balance,
sure.
well, then we're not doing a capital project.
Right.
So at some point, there will be a defined amount that we have to fit everything into.
Okay.
Yep. So other possible uses of fund balance besides staffing, we have our one-to-one initiative, and we're gonna need to figure out how to get Chromebooks in the hands of fourth graders each year. Right now, I believe that money is about, I believe Tim said 55 to 60,000, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought the technology fees covered that.
It is, but only a portion of it, because it also has to pay for that lease. Because that lease payment is every year,
Yeah, no? Looks like-
so you're gonna get rid of some devices and you're gonna add more devices, because the kids are gonna graduate, new
Right.
kids are gonna come in, so you have to have a plan to rotate that, because or you can lease that portion each year, but then you're gonna have a 3-year lease on a 2-year, it's a choice that you'll have. We'll bring you a plan. These are just choices,
Okay.
okay? Perhaps you wanna start buying on the off years of the big year. So, for example, you have a 3-year lease on all of the Chromebooks. In years 2 and 3, you're gonna replace one grade level. Perhaps on those years, you try to figure out how to buy the Chromebooks. And then on the 3rd year, when you have all of them again, then your lease or the dollar amount is less because you've actually purchased some along the way. Yeah.
Is the fourth grade part of the initial one-to-one that we did?
Yes, it is.
It is, okay.
That's
Yeah.
the lowest grade.
Yeah, it was grades 4 to
I
12.
thought it was fifth grade and we were trying to add the fourth, okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a thought of when I talk about, is there a reason why we might want to use some of the fund balance? Perhaps that's it. The learning management system also, we will have to figure out a way to kind of operationalize that as well, which is going very well. Maybe we want to use fund balance on that. As I mentioned earlier, we're continuously challenged at certain times of the year for the grounds. Perhaps there's a way that we can address that concern at the beginning and the end of the years. Right now, there's just not enough labor out there, and so we continue to struggle. We're working hard at it, and it gets better every day, but sometimes of the year, it's a shame, because it's always that first week of school. Always.
So I have a question. Do we only hire college kids?
No, we hire adults too for $12 an hour, but we don't pay much because it's mowing the grass.
You're talking about for summer?
Can you hire some of the high school students?
We don't generally put high school students on lawn equipment till they're age 18.
It's a liability.
I mean, I can appreciate lawn equipment, but I mean, there's other things that are not lawn equipment.
Well, the string trimmer is same thing.
Just saying.
We hire them to paint, high school kids paint, but that's been, that hasn't worked well for us recently, and so we're looking into other options for painting as well.
Okay.
So, in terms of your thoughts, we're recommending a spend down between 3 and 5 years. So perhaps a portion each year, and then that way, if any of those unknowns happen or something changes, we've got the revision of the strategic plan. Perhaps there's something that comes out of it that we don't know about today, but we don't want to spend it all today because we want to save some for tomorrow. It's going to be a balance of how much and how quick do we want to be responsible with this money. Please note, this is the process we were talking about before, that we talked about with whatever we do, if we choose to bring that fund balance down, we will have a planned deficit budget. So we'll need to communicate it to our public as such, a planned deficit. That is the only way you can reduce your fund balance, is to spend more than you take in.
So I'll be blunt with this one. I don't want anything above 45 days to be used against us when we start negotiating.
Yeah.
And it has been.
For the last 2 contracts.
Yes. Meaning, when is the next negotiation time frame? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Hence,
5 years for
that is a
KEA
time
and
frame
2
that
more
we need
for
to cut it down by.
Yes.
I paid my taxes 2 years ago. I want to see the money spent now.
Well, that's basically, well, okay. I'm kind of going around that route.
So this is something that affects what you're talking about, and it wasn't mentioned. There is a 3-year, I believe, phase-in to a $15 an hour minimum wage. To me, I think that would be a recurring fee that, because it's gonna be a big jolt right at the beginning. We have people that only make 11, 10, even under, 10 something. Some of the parapros make 10 something, don't they? So, as we phase it in, then you also have to consider, did you require somebody in a higher position to have a bachelor's degree? And if that position has a bachelor's degree and it's at 17 now, and the difference between them was 10 to 17 before, now do you need to raise the $17 an hour person to make it equitable because of not just somebody who's been here a long time, who's racked up a bunch of extra salary? I mean,
So maybe,
I just think that that's something that, unless you have another plan, was my real question, is there another plan to absorb those costs, or do we need to talk about it in the context of this discussion?
That kind of goes along with the example that you gave with the maintenance person. I mean, it kind of goes the same
those
way,
are
right?
And it
It's
affects,
the same
it
thing.
affects
You
negotiations
gotta blend it
because,
in the sense so it doesn't hurt us all at one time,
so
right?
we need, I guess we need to first decide, are we comfortable with reoccurring, which I'm not personally, or does it all have to be one-time expenses? And that'll limit a lot of this conversation.
Yes, it will.
I would like that when we're looking at this, I personally would like to look at it more than 1 year out, and I would like to see that our 5-year forecast is never going below 45 days. So for example, I wouldn't want to spend down to 45 days and then the next year need teacher laptops. I would like to have sort of factored that in. So there's only a few things that really pertains to, You also need a surplus every year to maintain 45 days, because your expenses go up every year.
Correct.
So if you want 45 days cash on hand for your expenses and your expenses go up, you need a surplus to keep that 45 days. You're looking at me like I'm
And
crazy.
it seems like that should be
You only
CPI.
can, I would guess I look at it.
3%, depending
You
on
know
what the
your revenues
contracts are.
relatively fixed.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure you keep your
Yeah,
budget
same, that same
expenses
percentage applies. Yeah,
less
same-
than your revenues.
the same percentage applies all the way.
So I wouldn't plan on a surplus, I'd plan on keeping my expenses below my revenues.
Yes.
If you keep your expenses flat every year, your 45 days will stay the same.
Correct.
If you decide to give someone a raise, you need a surplus.
But we have that built into the projections.
But then you need a surplus to keep your 45 days. Your 45 days is 12.5% of your expenses. So if
That's
your
where the taxes
expenses
come
go
in.
up, you have to have a
Oh, okay.
surplus to
You're-
keep 45
It's
days.
based on expenditures.
So I'm just saying that
Yeah.
it catches up to you. If you look at a 5-year forecast and you want a deficit spend, you'll almost get dinged twice because you won't have had the surplus to keep up with 45 days plus, so I would like to look at it in a 5-year picture because I think if you look 5 years out, you don't have $5 million anymore to stay at 45 days.
Yeah.
You have,
Good point.
3-point-something million. So I would just like to put that cautionary tale out there. I also think when you calculate 45 days, you should exclude, I would guess, this is in the weeds, but any planned deficit from the 45 days. So if you do $1 million one year to fix a
Oh,
parking lot.
sure.
I don't know that I would consider that in my 45 days, because that's
It's gonna
funky.
inflate it. It's gonna, you're
Right.
right, that
So I would
will-
like it to be very specific, of specific one-time expense that we earmark out, and I would pull it out of my 45-day calculation.
I understand
But
exactly what you're saying, Sean.
Beyond that,
So,
I would prioritize capital
The
expenditures over
only,
a
the
couple
only
of years.
reason I would object to your 5-year thing is, again, back to my statement. I don't
Is
want
something
that to
really-
be part of salary negotiations.
And I would hope we would have more of a plan than we have in the past, but yes,
we
I hear
never
you.
got one time or,
I would say one time.
okay, but we didn't, I don't feel like we got
Nope, yeah.
consensus, just
That's
because I
fine.
want to try, because otherwise we could go,
Forever.
yeah.
Come again?
One time,
One-time or reoccurring expenses, are you comfortable with spending this?
I think if we looked out 5 years, we could do some recurring things if we had an idea of where it was going at the end of the 5 years. Like if we saw, if we foresee,
I think that you should be building that into your 5 years from the get-go.
Yeah.
And then when you look out 45 years, look out 5 years. Look out 5 years at your 45 days, that's already baked in. So like if you
Yeah.
think I need to put in 100,000 a year extra in staffing to transition to this $15 an hour, I would say that gets baked into your forecast and then you just never go below 45 days. So I would say it's a hybrid, but I'm just thinking about it in different
Yeah.
steps.
So I would agree with you, what you just said, but at one time, nothing reoccurring or not plan on using.
But the recurring should be baked into our models that we're talking about the next couple of months.
there has to be a plan for
There
the,
has to be a plan.
Yes, no,
for
you're
the
right,
recurring
Teresa.
items too, and,
Yeah.
Ease into it. When do we have to be by 15
maybe
by?
1 year we
How many
can't
years?
eliminate something, but we
3
can
more.
foresee that in 2 years we could, you know?
Maybe the year that the minimum wage goes up, we don't buy any buses.
All right, I'm moving on. So if we,
So I asked the questions, and you guys were talking, so I apologize for talking over you guys, but, I asked the question when we have to be at $15 an hour, and that's about 3 years.
I think.
But it's stages, like
Yeah.
it goes
Yeah,
up.
that's what I'm
I think
saying.
it's a 24, 25
It's like
phase in
11,
or
so
something.
bleed in.
Yeah, 23,
13
3 or
24.
4 more years,
Yes.
but
And,
it goes up each year. I had it in that one memo.
Yeah.
so we can grow our budgets
Yes.
easily into it then, as opposed to recurring stuff, and use it for that.
So did we get consensus?
I'm okay with either, so one time's fine.
you're okay, one time?
I mean, it absolutely makes more sense to use it for one-time stuff, but
Okay. And we will have, okay, so do we need anything specific?
Yeah, I want to spend as soon as possible because we pay our taxes to get these things a while ago. So I would say spend it before school starts next year. Because it's
All
gonna
of
go,
it?
it's gonna go to capital projects anyway, and they're gonna happen over the summer, so.
Yeah, but some of them you can't do.
That's
You
why I
can't
said
do
school
during,
starts next year, that gives you the summer,
which is gonna have to be in next year,
yeah?
right?
So we have planned,
That's
we've
what we're
had planned
talking
deficit
about.
2 years.
We're
This
talking
year,
about the
next year.
2021 budget.
But we can do it in 2019, we just have to do an amendment to the budget, which we can do.
You could, but But what are you gonna what project will get done by June 30th?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm still waiting for you guys to, well,
Yep.
let's assume that we agree on this, which we probably won't, but let's assume we do. You're still gonna come back and tell us which projects.
Yes, we'll prioritize those.
Correct. I would suggest that we're done for 2019-20, in terms of capital projects, because of kids being in our buildings.
You could repave the track in January. I don't know. And I don't want to limit it to saying,
Okay. Well, the asphalt plants aren't open between.
we could paint the sky that year. You know, we don't have to limit it to, we can start sooner if we want to.
So does anyone else comment on the time frame?
I concur with Ryan, at least we should go sooner than later. I think the tax money's been collected, it should be spent. Taxpayers had the expectation that we were gonna use that money for education, we should be doing it, including buildings, including maintenance, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if we have to go as aggressive as Ryan said, but maybe before the next school year would make sense to me.
Okay, one thing I would like us to look at, and if we hear chatter or we foresee, maybe we should wait until after the III conference, because if that property tax freeze is gonna happen, sooner rather than later, I would hate for us to have a set spending plan, and we're already into getting, bids and everything for all these projects, then all of a sudden we're socked with the property tax freeze and we're gonna need the money for something else.
For those projects.
Can we,
Well, I'm in two
Go
camps. One
backwards.
is there, and
Get
the
that
other
backwards.
is if we don't go ahead and spend it on these capital projects, we will find something else to spend it on. We're gonna
Correct.
just write these out, and then it's not on our radar, it's not an issue we're gonna have later on down the road, and we can just focus on the one issue.
I understand your concern about property tax freezes, but they've been talking about that since I've got elected. Nothing's happened. And if they do that, I would think they'd at least give us a year or two to.
It'll be blended.
So I think they feel like they've given us the year or two. And one thing that's changed is that it's a Democratic House and Senate, it's a Democratic governor, and they had a fire lit under them, for a little bit there. We thought it was gonna happen really quickly, and I know it didn't, but I think there's probably a little more concern than there was when,
All right, it's basically October, so we're talking about waiting 6 weeks. I'm fine with that. If you're,
I mean,
Well, in December is when we're bringing it back anyway, so that would
but
be after
I
Triple.
mean, you're the one,
Yep.
you're the one that, you speak to the legislators, you're the one that represents the district at all those things, and you hear from Luda and you hear from everybody else, if no one else is planning for it at this point, if no one thinks it's gonna happen, I think you probably have a better, your finger on the pulse of that, and I'll trust what you say.
Sure.
Based on that, but I guess,
Thank you.
if you feel that it's coming, or you and Julianne together, because you both have different kind of sources that you can then,
Our people.
yeah.
And I definitely, they were talking about large projects. If Mr. Payton came in and said, you know what, this one can wait one more year, I don't know that I'm like, sorry, it's now or never. I'm not sure that I
Yeah.
quite have that feeling. I'm not sure that we would have that situation. That he,
Yeah, but I think we also, I don't think we've looked, because we've not been in this position before, we've not looked at what it would look like to have $4 million in 1 year. So what we'd have to do is take some time to look to see, are there things, I think what I'm hearing you say, Shauna, there might be two things that are stacked at the same building that you couldn't do at the same time. You might have to wait for one to get done before you do the next. You know what I mean? So I don't know what all of those are. I'd have to go back and look at those again, because it was over 5 years. And if we jam it down to 2 years, we would just have to see how those things interact. And Julianne, I don't know if you know any of those off the top of your head right now?
Not
or-
tonight.
Okay.
I mean, I know the projects, but I need to look where we've got them in the
Okay.
plan, because we had them pretty well spread out. So I would like some time with that. And to see if anything has deteriorated or raised, moved up on the priority list. That's what we'll be doing in the next 2 months.
so.
We have all of our meetings scheduled for that.
Isn't there a possibility too that there are things that are not on the list? For example, are there people who decided not to ask for or put in for the flexible seating and flexible furniture for the personalized learning because we didn't have the money and it was gonna be a low priority, so we don't know about all those needs? I mean, maybe we wanna trick the district out with everything that we need for that. I'm not saying I do, I'm just saying it's a consideration we should think about, and
As
maybe
of
we don't
right now,
know.
none of the schools have spent all $10,000 that they've
Okay.
been given. I'll have to check and see how they're doing on that.
Okay.
All right, so
Yeah, I'm curious.
I guess going from this topic back to the last one and back and forth. All right, so for sake of discussion, we're talking about $4 million. We're $8 million behind on capital projects. So I would like, going back to the other topic, I'd like to see in your 5-year projections, I'd like us to get caught up on the maintenance budget or the capital budget during the course of those 5 years. So if we, I don't know what the number is to bring that up to for the budget purposes, but if we spend.
Over and above the fund balance spending?
Yeah, so we get caught up on all of these projects between the, it's not extra, but the money that we have, but, and what we plan on spending, we should be,
I don't think there's enough money.
well, there is if they take it out of buses or
Oh,
buildings or.
that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure which math you're, yeah.
so if we spend $4 million tonight and say, here's $4 million for capitals projects, you're still $4 million short. We need to catch up that $4 million over the course of our 5-year budget.
And use that what we're being
Because there's still,
budgeted for
there's gonna
else.
be stuff, every year there's gonna be something else after that.
Always will be.
Yes. That's where we need that recurring number, so that whatever it becomes, we can
No, I
sustain.
understand. But
No,
it's
I
some-
agree with you, so we need a recurring number in there.
Yeah, but I guess to say we're caught up, I mean, I get that there's some projects that we've put off that we feel like we should really address. But off the top of my head, I don't remember what's at the bottom of the list, and so I'm not comfortable prioritizing that over curriculum or technology right now.
I'm there with you. You said it much better than I was
Thanks.
thinking in my head, how am I gonna say this without sounding like a jerk?
Yeah.
That, you know, maybe some of those things on the bottom of the capital projects list just don't really need to be
Yeah, but
as urgent.
I don't know.
And I'm not saying, you know, maybe
I just
somebody
haven't gotten
said,
that,
oh,
we've
I
never been
really,
close to that.
No, we,
you know,
You both
I
have-
really need a new,
you both have valid
Whatever.
points. I'm not saying that, but I know that, like you said, we threw out the idea of putting solar on 2 of the buildings because we know the roofs aren't gonna last that long. So, like, I'm not trying to dismiss what you're saying, but if we don't plan on catching up at some point, then we're always gonna be behind.
Yeah, we need to do more than we're doing now. I agree with that. I just don't know what the number is. So what do we want to do for recurring and then at least the forecast? We're somewhere between 700,000, 1.4 million, I think.
Well, what's the number to catch us up in your 5 years that we're talking about? 4 million over 5 years is what?
I don't know where you get the 4 million.
Well,
if we
So
have
we're-
8 million, we give 4 million from
800,000.
the fund balance now, is what he's saying.
which is what I think we're kinda talking about.
Maybe. I don't know if
I
I
don't
believe your 4 million.
know that
Yeah.
everybody's
Okay, all right,
there.
then maybe I'm
Yeah.
premature in bringing this back around. to
Yeah, I
where
think so.
we're-
But that might be the big picture of where you want to land. Do we want to see what $1 million looks like? I'm just throwing out a number. And then go from there?
Are you talking about $1 million in the capital number?
For operating, back to
Yes.
J2. Yes.
Okay, yep.
Is that
I think,
to start with?
Fine. It's-
And we can increase it?
We could, once we see the projections later on, yeah.
Yeah, when we
And
bring
then
the
we'll look to
projects.
see what the 5-year, 45 days looks like.
Fair enough.
Again, I don't like the 5-year.
You don't like, go ahead, that's what don't you like?
I just
Oh,
don't
because
like
of
the
the
fact
timing
that
of-
Because there might be
somebody's
money
gonna come
sitting
at
You
there
know,
us.
when I say that though, the only thing that really jumps out at me is the teacher laptops. So I think when we look at it.
No, I'm talking salaries. I'm not
We're
talking.
locked in.
5 years.
Not, in 5 years, we're not. We got other ones
Well, we're-
out there.
Yeah, but how far out do you wanna plan?
Maybe I should say,
Until, right before it gets, the other
next
one comes, so they don't even
The next
touch us.
negotiations.
maybe I should just say we want to look at it and decide from there. I mean, I hear what you're saying. When I said that, I think I kind of meant let's look at the 5-year projection. You can stop looking at your 2 if you want, but you want to see that 5-year put
Yeah.
together. Do you know what I'm saying? And then,
Yeah, I hear you.
Put it together, then you can
So-
direct us.
yeah.
there's always going to be another argument from the other side, in negotiations. It's going to be, you know, maybe not, well, you
You purposely stuck
historically, you built your fund balance on our backs.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, so then if we spend it, you spent our money, you know, you had it, you built it on our backs. There's always going to be a PR angle that they're gonna take. And, you know, they're always gonna, yeah, I think,
Although I think that's probably, there's a lot of truth in that. I do think though this last negotiation ended on a very amicable note. And I don't know if it's gonna go there immediately the next round, right? Like, when we get through the next 5 years, like, we ended with a really good contract that both teams were pretty happy with.
okay, I can tell you the last time that is exactly what happened.
No,
We
I-
actually
yeah.
had an agreement in the room that, you know, about the topic, that, you know, we were even. There wasn't, and then lo and behold, at the beginning of these negotiations, they brought up again, you owe us for the times that, you know, we didn't get.
Yeah, 2 contracts.
The
ago,
freeze.
you still owe
The
us
freeze.
$1 million.
You owe us for the freeze.
No, I
And-
understand that. I just-
Well, so I'm saying, it was amicable, just like you're saying, it's
Right.
gonna happen again. I think,
Yeah, and maybe,
history
yeah,
says that it's,
Yeah, but I don't.
I mean, don't ride on that wave of goodwill for too long,
Well, we could do like Chicago.
because it was that way last
But I
time.
agree with you.
Everybody loved everybody at
Some
the
of
end
the
of the class.
discussions about the way the math was structured this time around, I think was pretty innovative. So that's the only thing I was thinking. But
Okay.
So
Are
I'm
we
all in
good?
favor of being at 45 days and no more, and if, hey, if something comes up and we gotta drop down to 30 to pay the bill, then I'm fine with that.
You got
is
what
that
you
what,
need?
is that what we're talking about?
Generally, yeah, but it's how we get from here to there.
Ready to move on?
See that
All right.
projection?
Thank you.
Thank you.
What'd
I
you say?
appreciate the
See that
conversation.
projection?
Yes, thank you.
They said objection. I'm like, wait, did I?
Wait, I'm sorry.
So are,
What, did we specify how long?
we haven't talked, I don't think we talked about priorities, about what we want it spent on.
I thought we were coming back with a capital project,
Yeah,
capital.
that's what we're bringing
But did you
back.
want more different than capital talked about?
I thought,
Go ahead.
because we were saying, he brought up Ryan, brought up, that guy.
That guy.
Ryan brought up that, you know, we're gonna spend the 4 million on the capital projects, and then we have the 4 million left. And you brought up, well, maybe we don't want the 4 million spent on capital projects, and I feel like that was left hanging there.
That was left hanging. I mean, I think we
Because
need,
you said you don't know that you would prioritize it over curriculum.
I
and-
agree. And so,
and
I mean,
things
I
like
guess,
that. And I'm there too,
Yeah.
and so I don't want anybody to leave thinking that it was,
I'm envisioning when you get the forecast and you get the capital projects, that this will implode and there are gonna be a lot of hard, I mean, the numbers won't even be close, and that you'll be forced to have that conversation that you're saying.
okay, because some of the other things that I think, okay, we never talk about program expansion. We expand a little bit at a time, a little bit here and there, a couple new AP classes at the high school, but are there any large program expansion opportunities that the administration or the board would like to see for the community?
There are for sure, but if they're longer term, I don't know how we balance that in with the recurring versus the one-time. Because I'm sure with the next strategic plan, we've already talked a little bit about personalized learning and what next steps could look like, but those are things that are 5, 6, 7, 8-year, 10-year plans down the road. So I don't know how much that fits with the one-time talk or one-time expenses for now.
So I guess I thought that strategic financial spending plan meant more than just spending down the fund balance.
I think so too. I had that
Yeah.
same thinking, that it would be more
I thought we were gonna,
programmatic.
say, these are the priorities we see moving forward, knowing that when the whole group gets together and talks about the strategic plan, that then this would be at least brought to the table as part of it.
And I guess, I don't disagree with you. I thought tonight we were deciding if it was one time or reoccurring that we were spending it on, and how soon we wanted it spent. And we're leaving it to the administration to come back to us with a plan of, here's what we want to do.
And we will,
Because, I mean, maybe they want flexible seating in all the classrooms.
Right.
I don't know, that's,
And I guess I misunderstood. I guess I thought we were going to talk about those things in the immediate sense, but that the discussion was going to include a strategic spending plan.
Yeah, and this-
Like,
me saying spend it
which
on-
means everything.
yeah, me spending on parking lots isn't strategic, and it isn't a plan, it's my pet project.
So I
I
guess,
mean, I'm not saying we don't need to spend the money on capital projects, we need some.
so I guess I was thinking, based on our discussion, I was thinking the same thing, that the strategic spending might be programmatic as well, or however you want to say that, operational in nature, and maybe not quite just the more the fund balance discussion. But it seemed like maybe some of our discussion tonight was saying, let's delve into those more as the topics come up. And that's where I'm thinking that stuff gets interwoven into the forecast, but it just wasn't all tonight.
I just worry that as we push it down the road, that we're gonna spend the fund balance, and then we're gonna find something in that plan that we wanted the money for.
Well, and we'll bring some of that in, just like Dr. Fuchs's example with the maintenance person or a social worker or something like that. If, as part of this conversation, we have those, we will include those as part of it.
Okay.
And that
You
was
know,
kind of the point
yeah.
I was making way back when, was if we say we want to teach Japanese to all the kids, we can do that.
Yeah.
That might be our goal, and then we gotta figure out, it's gonna be reoccurring, so we can't use this fund balance money to pay for it.
But we
that's
should
what I
start
was
trying
going
to
for a
figure that
bigger
out.
question of priorities of how we, it wasn't just this 4 million or whatever it is, it's where are we going?
I'm fine with moving forward as long as we don't lose
Sight
sight
of that.
of that discussion,
Okay,
and not a year from now.
everyone good? All right, Superintendent Board Report.
Yes, thank you. First one, Facilities Planning Committee met last week, and as you've already heard, the primary topic that we discussed was the solar project feedback, and they were in agreement of the batch one and then the southwest portion of the high school for the ground mount. So that conversation went well, and as Shauna, who attended, spoke, they asked some good questions and a couple different questions. Had some good dialogue with that. The Kaneland Foundation Golf Outing was 2 weeks ago, last week, and unfortunately, we had about 12 fewer golfers, which is 3 or 4 vendors that have come in the past didn't come, so that's unfortunate. But we had more sponsors than we've had in the past, so we ended up, I think, a little bit over 9,000, and we're usually between 9,000 and 10,000, so we're about where we were, because we make more from sponsors and donations than we do from golfers, so that offset fewer golfers to play, but the same amount of dollars. And again, just as a reminder, the $63,000 that the foundation put forward towards the Chromebook covers were for this year, so this $9,000 will go into the balance there to continue to try to build those dollars up. Citizens Advisory Committee met, tackled 3 major topics. First one, as always, at this time of year is the start of school. So we just got feedback on how the start of school year went, ideas, thoughts, and some good ideas there, some good feedback. And as we've shifted to an administrative advisory committee, I'm just going to take that information back to cabinet and ad team, and we'll get the information back. Second topic was one-to-one. How did the one-to-one Chromebook rollout go? They've gave us some good feedback on parent usage, student usage, some questions, idea of putting a sticker on it, where the help desk is in their building, those kind of things, so their students are aware. And also, they asked if, for the next meeting in November on the 14th, if maybe somebody could come and show some of the parents how to use a Chromebook and how to access Google apps and the apps that their kids are doing, so they can kind of speak the same language that their kids are speaking at school. Then the last one, as we get ready to transition from Kaneland 2020 to the next strategic plan, I brought with I gave each person the Kaneland 2020 brochure and just asked them to look at it, review it, and see what their thoughts were on Kaneland 2020 as we move to the next one. And we've got some feedback there, so we will, that'll be one data source among a number of surveys and planning committees and strategic plan committees, those things. So it's just additional data points to use to move forward. So that was a good conversation. Did share with both FPC and CAC the shift from advisory committee to advisory committee to the administration from the board. They had a few questions, but nothing major. They were fine with that. Just good questions. How are we going to organize it? How do we get communication out? Those things. But it went well. We had about 15 members at CAC and about 8 or 9 at FPC, which are about normal numbers, maybe down a little bit for CAC. Then just a reminder for our next school board meeting, based on the day off, which is Columbus Day on Monday, the 14th, that next school board meeting is on a Wednesday. It's one of the few times we meet on a Wednesday, so it's Wednesday, October 16th. Those are my updates, so thank you.
Great, thank you. I wanted to share with the board about a meeting that I attended this afternoon. The Village of Melbourne is in the process of updating their strategic plan. They did it most recently in 2013. They're more on a 5 to 6 year kind of update. The last time we did it, or they did it, we were invited to the table and I went then. Additionally, they always try to get some high school students to give them feedback because they feel like it's gonna be their village. So I really like the way that they are forward thinking with that. Some of the topics that I shared on behalf of the district include the fact that we value the impact fees that we get, that the village collects on our behalf when they have residential developments, especially if it brings students into the district. We greatly appreciate those or value those impact fees. I talked with them about our communication. We have a great working relationship with their first responders, specifically fire and police, as well as the village administrator and public works. So they're always very helpful and that communication is very positive. Additionally, I thank them. Many of their local businesses support Kaneland in a variety of ways, and so I mentioned to them about that as well. I did also mention to them that should they move forward with any large residential developments, please continue because they always have in the past, to include the district administration in the conversations so that we can plan accordingly if new schools are needed, depending on their development. And let's see. They are in need in the village of significant infrastructure repair and replacement, similar to our capital projects, before they can spend a lot of money on new developments. So that was kind of some of their feedback. Otherwise, it's with a consultant that I sat with, and then I was sitting with 2 other village trustees. They had groups going all day long of various stakeholders, and then I think they're doing some more tomorrow as well. They'll take all that feedback and then turn it into the plan, the village board will. So, just to let you know that if you see it in the newspaper that they're updating their plan, Kaneland has been represented. So.
Sean, one other thing I forgot. On Saturday night, Julianne mentioned a little while ago that there will be an update coming from the special needs, or not, from all the PTOs, PTNs, all their donations for the year. One of the things that our special needs PTO does twice a year, they do an outing at Excel Gymnastics over near Randall Road in Geneva. And Saturday night, I went and attended it. I didn't do any jumping, but it was just cool to see our students with special needs there with their families. They had pizza afterwards, so I just hung around, talked with some of the parents, and it was neat too that they invite Geneva, Batavia, St. Charles, and I think Burlington, that surrounding area that also serve Mid-Valley, the special ed cooperative. And so it was just neat to see all the kids just running around, and it's just amazing how it's been about 5 years since I was there when my daughter took some stuff, and that smell just doesn't change. That's just the smell of feet and what, it was amazing how quickly that came back, but it's kind of an aside. It's kind of an aside, but anyway, it was just really neat to see our families there. And it's really special for them because they can make connections with parents for the first time and try to get some other connections made, just like everybody does at any activities that their kids do. But it was just really neat to see that. So I just forgot that I went to that, so I wanted to share that too. So that was fun.
Anything else? All right, any topics for future agendas?
I have okay, I almost feel like we should call this topics for future agendas or updates.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is probably more appropriate for an update. I assume I'm not the only person who's been getting these emails from the Kane County about the land cash, the change in the legislation for their ideas for the land cash thing.
Honestly, I don't know what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
So, I mean, maybe I'm included on it because I was the president or something.
Lucky you. Yeah, I think that's just you.
And at first I was just ignoring them, then I started reading it, and it's, so the county is changing the way that the land wants to change the way the land cache is done in the unincorporated areas of Kane County. Beyond that, I can't tell you exactly what they're doing, but I guess that's what I'm wondering, and I'm wondering if there's any impact to us.
Dr. Lane, that's that meeting you went to on my behalf, I believe, that
Yep, over at the Government Center. Yeah,
Yes.
they are, they have met, they were looking for scenarios and options to kind of reformat and restructure it, but
Mm-hmm. I haven't
there's
seen
not been a
any
follow-up.
outcome.
Yeah,
But I do know that all the business managers got together before that meeting. I just couldn't make it, so Dr. Layden went on my behalf. And we had made some recommendations of changes. And so I believe that they were listening
Yeah.
to those.
yeah, it was just kind of it was a brainstorming of what all of the different taxing bodies do and how they operate and how any of these changes would impact them and what different communities are doing now, different municipalities are doing it. So they didn't say if there was a follow-up meeting or when the follow-up meeting will be, but I'll find out. I'll get more information on it, so I'll be able to, we will be able to provide an
Maybe I could forward you
update.
the email that
Please do.
concerned me, because
Yep.
when I started reading about it, I thought, oh, that doesn't sound like the way land cache is done now, and I don't know that that's good for us.
You know what, I haven't seen that either, so
Okay.
I would appreciate it as well.
And there was a number, and they were also looking at how they would, how many student, or how many children they estimate in a building, and then if it went from public housing to private housing, or from housing to something that's commercial, how would they adjust and shift and keep those things all accurate? So they said they were going to work on them, but I've not seen anything.
Yeah, there was something about like within a subdivision, there were restrictions on when you could choose land from a developer and things like that. They were changing things like that, maybe?
And we did have a recommendation on that
Okay, so maybe it's,
at time of permit, so I'll be curious to see if what it says
Yeah.
is what we
Please forward,
recommended.
please
Okay.
forward those, because I'm not getting those.
okay,
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
okay.
Any other
Thank
topics?
you.
I don't know if I'm getting,
Thank you.
Public comment? We will say no.
One
Oh,
other
yeah.
topic. We have contract with all the people who utilize our facilities. We saw it one time, I don't know how long ago. Are those, and I know it's reoccurring, is there a time frame where we're gonna get to see that again?
I believe I brought you the update this summer for the costs, because we just updated the costs, is that what you're talking about?
We charge people? Is that-
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
We just did
About
it
the end
this
of the-
summer in July.
Or are you talking about who they are, not what we charge them?
Uh,
I don't know what you're going.
I guess it doesn't matter, yeah, I guess there was controversy with who they were, but that's nothing.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
There was a time when we discussed who they were, but that's, I don't think it's neither here or there. It's just more of, I guess whether they're, I guess, is the charge still the same, or, you know, fluctuating with it, or it's just remain the same?
I can get you a copy of what the board approved in July.
Okay.
And then we use that for the year, or until it's updated, when we need further changes.
Okay.
So, can we attach that to Friday's update, what, the board approved in July? Because that's what we're using for this year, because that's what you approved.
So it's just the same document that we had here
Yeah,
from July? Okay.
yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yep.
I'm assuming I missed that meeting or something. No, I don't recall it.
So, do we plan on coming back with recording if we have action after? Because
We can, but as I've talked with Maureen about this, some districts that videotape don't come back after closed
Right.
session. So on this one, we don't have to. We can just take the action that we have to take, and it'll be in the minutes, it'll be on the website. So if we don't have video of it, it means it still happened.
Yeah.
So we don't need to have Colin wait.
Okay.
But then, are you saying that the action will still take place in open session?
Open
Yes.
Just not with the video?
Right.
Okay.
Got it.
So it'll still be in the minutes and recorded.
Thank you.
So
But
after
before we
to
go into
the
closed
vote-
session, we do need a secretary. We
Gotcha.
need to determine that before we go in. And then Ryan had a quick question. This book, Superintendent Updates, if you recall, Pay It Forward is the activity that we're doing district-wide for a community connection piece. So if after you look at the book and after you read it, if you and your family or us as a board or some portion of the board wants to do a pay-it-forward activity or wants to just share what they're doing or what they have done, this is what the book references. So if you go on our district website and you go to Pay It Forward, it'll show a series of videos, starting with mine to Dr. Fuchs through administrators, and then we're hoping at some point parents, board members that want to share what they're doing to Pay It Forward, or any other activities. It's all based on this book, and this is that text. So good family reading activity.
Okay.
So we
All right.
will need a
So
secretary.
we're going to go into closed session. The meeting, the video of the meeting will conclude when we go into closed session. We do not have a secretary, so we need do a motion for secretary?
Secretary pro tem.
Pro tem. Would anyone like to make a motion for secretary pro tem?
I make a motion that Teresa serve as secretary.
I second that.
Is Teresa voting
We
no?
won't mention that the vice president is supposed to do that in the absence of the secretary, but okay. I'll do it.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Is there, can we do a roll call?
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Farber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye. Abstain.
Mrs.
No, I'm
Junk.
kidding.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Motion carries 6-0, I guess begrudgingly. All right.
Before you read that, can I share one
Yeah.
other thing?
Oh.
As you see, as President Sparber is about to read this, you'll see the last 4 lines. That was a new change for Open Meetings Act. So when Shauna reads
I
that.
should actually read
Yep, when Shauna gets to that part, you just kind of wrote.
Okay.
What it does is it's a change that allows districts to go into closed session, as you'll see, to talk about contractors from the parks, recreation, education centers, volunteers, education settings, any of those things. So if we have a parent who's a volunteer on a field trip, if something happens, we can go into closed session to talk about it. If we have a contractor, things that we used to have to do in open session, we can now do all of those in closed session, and that was a change in the last legislative session. So that's what that part means when Shauna gets into that. It sounds new and different to you.
Thank goodness. All right,
Yes.
so we're going to go into executive session for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, this does not have the same ring, or a volunteer of the public body, or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. Is there a motion to go into executive session for that reason? So moved. And a second? And a roll call.
Mrs. Farber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mrs. Junk. Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
We have Mr. Carey.
Mr. Carey.
There we go, motion carries 6-0. I actually looked at it that time. All right, so we are going to close session.
Take a second to get a cookie.